Okay, welcome everyone. Thanks for coming on Tuesday, the second of scheduled 2 rounds of the Special Licensing Subcommittee to determine the review on Finsbury Park Live Nation Festival Republic licence. We can start with a round of introductions so everyone knows who everyone is. My name is Councillor Vincent Carroll. I shall be chairing this evening.
I'm Councillor Sarah Williams.
Glenn Barnfield, Committee Coordinator.
Michelle Williams, Legal Advisor.
Asita Ranatunga, Barrister and Legal Advisor to the Committee.
Dale Barrett, Haringey Licensing Team Leader.
Rockwell Charles, Haringey Noise.
Hubert Malcolm, Head of Community Safety and Enforcement Licensing Authority.
Steve McDonnell, Director, Environment and Neighbourhoods, Haringey.
Simon Farrow, Commissioning Manager for the Public Realm, covering parks.
Sarah Jones, Events and Partnerships Manager for Haringey.
Magdalena Gray, Harrison Grant Solicitors.
Charles Friedman, Barrister for Friends of Finsbury Park.
Richard Vivian from Big Sky Acoustics, Noise Expert for Friends of Finsbury Park.
Susan Ring, Harrison Grant Solicitor, Solicitor to Friends of Finsbury Park.
Tom Palin, Committee Member of the Friends of Finsbury Park.
Melvin Benn, Licence Holder.
Philip Colvin, QC Barrister for the Licence Holder.
Simon Taylor, Solicitor for the Premises Licence Holder.
Good evening, it's Jim Griffiths from Vanguardia, an acoustic consultant representing Live Nation.
Councillor Luke Qualley-Harrison.
Thank you very much, everyone. I'm going to again notify everyone in the room that this is being filmed for webcast and will be retained for posterity as well. And even though the cameras don't go onto the public gallery in general, you may be captured either audio or visually. So by taking part in the meeting, you accept that, and if you don't, now is the time to leave. Having said that, we'll crack on with the meeting. One thing I would note about the meeting last night, I think went quite well in the sense that we got through the agenda and everyone was listened to with respect, and everyone had their say to the extent that was appropriate. And I would just ask that we do the same for the second part of the meeting, and we'll all get through it. Okay. Right then. So the way we intend to proceed this evening is that the responsible authorities have the opportunity to make their representation to the committee. Now, I don't mind in which order you take that. Thank you very much.
Sorry, Chair, can I just clarify, because obviously I was seen handing out papers to you, just to clarify that they were in fact the proposed conditions from the Haringey and Islington side, and also the document that Ms Ring sent over to me earlier today, which were their proposed conditions which they spoke to yesterday. So
yeah, absolutely, and yeah, it's very useful. I have the 3 sets of conditions, which I'm sure will be very instructive for the committee when we deliberate. Mr. Malcolm.
Thank you, Chair. A copy of the rep can be found on pages 742 to 750 of the bundle. If it's okay with you, Chair, as the rep has been shared previously, I will not go through this line by line. If that's okay for you, I'll just pull out some key themes. This rep has been submitted as licensing responsible authority of the Licensing Act 2003. The Licensing Authority have considered the review application submitted by the Friends of Finsbury Park, giving reasons for the review of the Wireless Festival 2017, causing undue public nuisance and arising crime and disorder. The representation from the Licensing Authority is submitted to give an overview of the plans and operations put in place during 2017, event planning and delivery, their impact on the promotion of the licensing objectives, and the improvements made following the event in 2017. We've heard yesterday that the licence and its conditions relate to how the premises licence holder promotes the 4 licensing objectives: prevention of public nuisance, prevention of crime and disorder, public safety, protection of children from harm. I won't go into the role of the SAG. That's contained in Ms Barrett's bundle, section 13. A summary is that the SAG is in place for the event planning and is chaired by the Council. The SAG meetings include responsible authorities, emergency services, i.e. the police and ambulance, Transport for London, etc. These are the people who have a statutory position on the SAG and have formal powers to object and sign off the event management plan no later than 28 days prior to the event. The role of the SAG is separate to operation management of the event. The SAG is there in an advisory capacity to provide independent advice to the event organisers, assist the local authority and other key partners in exercising safety and other public protection functions, and to work in partnership to create consistent and coordinated processes. The conditions of the licence can again be found on section 12.5 of the main report, page 20. The premises licence, the condition to require the holder to submit an event management plan as part of the licensing process. The conditions on the licence reflects the matters covered in the operating schedule. Times of operation for the licensable activity, crowd management, means of escape and noise management. Section 12 of the main reports covers the event management plan, pages 19 to 20. The contents of the EMP forms the basis of discussions that take place at the SAG. The responsibility of the management of the event still remains with the event organiser, and therefore the SAG needs to work closely with the event management team. If I move over to some of the key changes for 2017 from the summer programme for events, a number of changes were implemented by Festival Public to basically improve the event, reduce the impact on the local area and provide the licence and promote the licence objective. I won't go through all these, Chair, but some of these were reducing the capacity to 37,500. Stage 2, usually situated along Seven Sisters Road, was removed. The event finished 30 minutes earlier at 10 p.m. on Friday and Saturday, and 50 minutes earlier on the 9th of July. There was LED signage introduced for 2017, which gave updates in real time to provide egressive crowds with information relevant on the onward journey. The police introduced new counter-terrorism measures for 2017. The reduction of the impact of noise on local residents was done using specific software to target individual frequencies which cause a problem and address low frequencies. Vehicle movements during the build and break was closely monitored, and you can see for yourself, Chair, a list there. Festival Public applied for road closures to Islington Council directly. The Islington Highways officer was provided with the egress plan in advance of the feedback. If I can skip to traffic issues, Chair. There were some issues with the execution of the egress plan during the first night of 2017 event, which is recognised and lessons learned. There's a list there that I will not go into much detail, but some of the road closures were implemented late, which meant the barriers for crowd control at Manor House were still built at egress started. Lack of communication about where to go and different messages will be given by different security companies. However, despite the above issues, the crowds at Finsbury Park Station flowed well, with no need for the station to close due to numbers. Regarding the prevention of public nuisance and noise management, a total of 42 noise-related complaints received, 70 complaints overall. Complaints were received via calls and emails to the Finsbury Park residence line and the council's out-of-hours noise line in 2017. There's a breakdown and there's a comparison can be found on page 107. In 2016, there were 40 complaints. 2017, 42 complaints. And in 2018, there were 75 complaints, 62 were noise and 13 vibration. This year, Festival Public took steps to carry out vibration monitoring in homes that had complained last year to get a better understanding of the issue. Whilst findings have not been analysed in depth, it is clear that the simultaneous crowd jumping is a cause of vibrations rather than noise itself. In regards to the prevention of crime and disorder, it is not the responsibility of the MPS, Metropolitan Police Service, to design or facilitate ingress and egress, infrastructure of the proposed event, but as an RA they do take a view on the plan submitted under the Public Safety and Prevention of Crime and Disorder licensing objective. Under prevention of crime and disorder, there's analysis of figures for 2017. There you have 39% of incidents related to theft, 13% related to sexual assault, 31% related to criminal damage, laughing gas or counterfeit currency. The crime figures should be noted in the wider context that over the course of a year in Finsbury Park, an average of 200 reported crimes that are not related to the event. In summary, Chair, lessons learned going forward. As a result of the learning from 2017, there were a number of adjustments made for 2018. These have further promoted licence objective and will be further refined for future events. Adjustments to the front lawn fencing, to adjust queues, front lawn cleaning, stated earlier that the whole front lawn was cleaned well in advance of the egress, stewarding on Hackney side roads, and there was better communication with stakeholders. The stakeholder group introduced since 2015 where approximately 20,000 letters were sent out. In conclusion, Chair, the licence review was submitted on the grounds that the 2017 wireless event caused serious disturbance amounting to a public nuisance and that the event has given rise to crime and disorder. Whilst recognising that events such as wireless do cause disruption in the local area, in the view of the licensing authority, the licence objectives were not undermined. The application for review and many of the representations submitted were to ASB before and during and after the event. Whilst the onus is on the organisers to put in place measures that will mitigate and go some way to address those concerns, inevitably this is done by deployment of stewards or SIA to a given area or position. However, in doing so, it must be stressed that stewards are agents of the organisers. They are not police officers and therefore they should take all reasonable steps to prevent disorder or breaches of the peace. They must not exceed the powers of the ordinary private person. In the view of the licence authority, the event organisers have demonstrated a willingness to engage appropriately with the responsible authorities and to learn from previous events to better improve the management of the events. This has been evident in improvements year on year. In taking matters forward and learning from past events, the licensing authority has worked with the licence holders to agree conditions. We must make clear that these conditions cover matters that licence holder has previously managed or applied best practice. The police also put in a Section 35 disposal, which gives the police ability to move crowds on where there's ticket touts or ASB. I will leave it to the licence holder to discuss the suggested and recommended conditions, but I'd like to bring the committee's, raise to the committee's attention condition 31 regarding low frequency noise and 32 regarding bass music noise level. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Mr. Malcolm. Given what we heard last night in terms of representations with regard to crime and social behaviour, etc., what do you make of the fact that the police haven't put in anything on this?
I would say that the police are satisfied that the promoter has met the licence objectives in regards to crime and disorder and public safety.
Thank you very much. Councillor Williams.
Hi, Mr. Malcolm. Just one small question. During the representations yesterday, we heard about people phoning the noise complaint line and not being sure that their complaint was logged because they didn't receive a reference number. Could you elaborate on exactly what the system is when somebody phones in a complaint?
I'm taking that because I actually do sit in the event control, and the complaints line is based next to the Haringey desk within event control. So the calls coming in are logged. Callers are given a reference number, and they're also given a callback to update them. So obviously two things happen. So the complaints are taken, it's then phoned over to the relevant officer on the promoter side to go to see what the issue is. That officer then engages with the complainant and reports back into ELT as to what the outcome is. The person manning the phone in the ELT also rings back the resident to give an update and to say, you know, they can call back if there's any further issues.
If I can just come back on that briefly, would that be if the resident was in Islington, Hackney or Haringey, or are they different systems?
That's correct. So the licence conditions requires the promoter to leaflet houses in a given radius across the 3 boroughs, and within that leaflet is the contact details really for all complaints relating to the events, for that to come through to that one complaints line. Yeah. And it was regardless of whichever borough you live in. Sorry. To your knowledge, have there ever been any breakdowns in that protocol, and when was that protocol started? And since its inception, has there been any failings on that line? So I've been doing licensing for a good few years now with the council, and since the start of these particular licences, that has always been a condition on the licence, that there should be a dedicated complaints line and the leafleting with all the information that local residents and businesses need in relation to the event is done 2 weeks prior to the event.
Mr. Malcolm, 75 penalty charge notices to illegally parked cars around the Wireless Festival. So that's over the weekend or so. Off the top of your head, do you know how that compares to, for example, an average of a weekend? And is there extra resource committed on that?
So I wouldn't have the facts for an average weekend, unfortunately, Chair, but there are extra resources that are put in place to cover that.
Thank you very much. Shall we move on to noise?
Thank you, Chair. My name is Rockwell Charles. I'm currently employed by the London Borough of Haringey within their enforcement section as an ASP specialist officer with respect to noise. Our section are charged with 3 duties. First duty is to independently monitor large-scale outdoor music events to ensure that the music noise levels imposed as a condition on the premises license is upheld. This is achieved by officers undertaking objective noise measurements at the 6 designated noise monitoring locations as specified as a condition in 106 of the premises license. That would be Appendix 1. On page 760. Sorry. Secondly, we are charged with operating a tri-borough reactive noise response service to investigate real-time noise complaints from large-scale outdoor music events, including Finsbury Park. That will cover the London Borough of Hackney, Islington, and also Haringey. This service will not investigate complaints of noises from helicopters, unfortunately. And thirdly and last, we also provide advice to the licensing authority on noise-related matters. I've read the application together with the 7 supported witness statements and the noise impact assessment produced by Big Sky. acoustics. The applicants, Friends of Finsbury Park, which at this time I would like to commend their approach in taking this actual review and using the licensing approach to do it, have applied for a review under the premises license under the two grounds of licensing objectives. As a responsible authority representing the Council's enforcement response team, which is the noise team at that time in 2017, I'm in a position to comment only on the licensing objective, the prevention of public nuisance only, with reference to regulated entertainment in the form of live and pre-recorded music. The applicants, Friends of Finsbury Park, have stated that the Wireless Festival 2017 has caused very serious disturbance amounting to a public nuisance. I have personally monitored Wireless Festival both in 2017 and 2018. Before monitoring the event in 2017, I observed that although the music levels, and this is historically, from the festivals were compliant with the designated music levels specified within the premises license, some residents were concerned that the low-frequency music noise level remained intrusive, as there was no objective level set to restrict it. To address this concern in 2017, the Council's enforcement response in bracket noise team proactively hired in equipment to measure not just the overall music level, but also the lower frequencies at 125, 63, and 40 hertz, and lower if required. You can refer to Appendix 2 on page 762, 763, 764, and 765, and that will actually show you that we are recording the low frequencies at the bottom of the page at 40, 63, and 125 hertz. The same pages at Appendix 2 would actually give you the low frequencies for Saturday, the 8th of July, 2017. I believe that's when Big Sky was out monitoring. And also for Saturday, the 7th of July, 2018, and that's to confirm that we are measuring the low frequencies. I just want to go through what our procedure is in dealing with noise, or how the Council actually goes about monitoring it. The Council's noise monitoring team is, at minimum, comprises of a team of 2 officers who travel around to 6 monitoring locations. 3 of them are in Hackney and 3 of them are in Haringey. We take objective noise measurements at these 6 locations. To maximize the number of readings at different monitoring locations, a 5-minute LEQ of the music level is measured and assessed against the noise limits for that location. If the music level is approaching or exceeding the noise level specified on the license, the event organizer's acoustician, in this case for wireless, it would have been in Vanguardia, is immediately informed so that decisive action can be taken. Communication was via WhatsApp group, which you can see at Appendix 4. Which is at 771. If you look at that, you would see a comprehensive dialogue between all parties who are undertaking the noise measurements at that time. And this would also include frequencies as well. If there's no noticeable difference in the noise levels, a 15-minute LEQ of the music noise level is measured to confirm if there is a potential breach of the licensing condition. I will turn to the witness statements that were included within the bundle. I don't want to go through them in detail, but I have examined the 7 witness statements supplied in the application. I would exclude 2 of these witness statements, Mr. Matthew Kalidis and Mr. David Webber, because their representations were based more on crime and disorder and not with regards to public nuisance regarding music noise. I have interrogated our council's database with regards to real-time and general complaints of loud amplified music directly associated with Wireless Festival. This has been logged by names supplied from the remaining 5 witnesses. Thomas Palin, we have no history of noise complaints on our database. Christian Bonato, no history of noise complaints on our noise database. Lucy Cohen, no history of noise complaints on our database. Robin Ganguly, he did make a complaint, and I do recall visiting him, but that was not in regards to wireless. That was with regards to an event this year. I believe it was the Liam Gallagher event. Alexis Skeets, we did have complaints in 2016 in regards to light pollution from floodlights. We did have a complaint in 2018 in regards to pollution from floodlights. I was unable to find any official complaints made by these witnesses to the Council's noise service or reactive service. Moving on to Big Sky Acoustics assessment of noise impact. On Saturday, the 8th of July 2017, the report confirms that continuous noise levels were recorded on a balcony of the 3rd floor residential flat along Seven Sisters Road. Simultaneously, noise measurements were made in the surrounding roads. From the report, it was reported that windows were rattling for prolonged periods in Wilberforce Road. Unfortunately, we received no complaints from Hackney residents on that date. The way how the Council's noise service operates, we actually have a mobile phone and get instantaneous emails coming up when complaints are made during the actual event. So residents can either call up who are in Hackney, Haringey or Islington, can call up the Council's noise service, irrespective of what borough they are in, once there is an event on Finsbury Park, a large-scale event, and the complaints will come through to us. Also on our website, we have an online complaint. So if people, which I don't expect a queue, but if there was a queue, they can get through to our service via an email service, online email, and that will ping up on our phone instantaneously. In the report, in section 9.5, and in the conclusions listed in 13.4, it recommends that the boundary noise condition should relate to the background level at the present time and not historic data, as the area may change, resulting in a higher or lower noise level. That's from Big Sky Acoustic Reports. 2 things here. It would not be practical for us to measure the background at every single point where somebody actually complains. And the revaluation of the existing background sound level along Seven Sisters would be unwarranted if there hasn't been some significant change in the area, or it could be the vehicle types have changed, volume of speed limit, or significant alterations to the road layout. I'm unaware of any significant changes in the area, but I do not have any objection towards carrying out a further assessment. Section 12.2 of the report recommends that the boundary noise should apply at all noise-sensitive properties, not just a few. This, in my opinion, would be an unworkable condition due to the coverage of complaints. As you could see in Appendix 3, which is on page 767 to 770, it shows the number of complaints that are widespread. It would be an unworkable condition for us to take up this actual recommendation. There was also mentioned a blanket 75 dBA LEQ 50 minutes outside any noise-sensitive premises. This is not in line with the POP code guidance, and this will mean an 8 dB increase in the background noise level at Seven Sisters Road, while at Stapleton Hall Road, residents would suffer an increase of 34 dB above the current background noise level. I do not entirely agree with Section 9.3 of the acoustic report, which states that the only constraints of specific noise levels is in condition 107, which reads, the sound levels should not exceed the background by more than 15 dB when measured as a 15-minute LEQ. Condition 108 of the premises license has been utilized by the Council's enforcement response team to restrict the low-frequency music noise levels upon request. This condition reads, any reasonable request of the licensing officer's representative will be complied with by the premises license holder in regards to sound levels. In Appendix 2, there are copies, which you've seen already, of the acoustic monitoring forms taken on Saturday, the 8th of July, 2017. The measurements clearly show that low frequencies at 40 and 63 and 125 hertz are being monitored. Vanguardia are contacted when low frequency noise measurements at 125, 63 and 40 hertz were deemed excessive. Although there were 2 complaints registered by Hackney residents to the Council's noise response service over the 3-day event, there were no noise complaints reported to us by Hackney residents on Saturday, the 8th of July, 2017, when it was reported that windows were rattling and people were affected severely by noise. What the Council has done proactively, we've recognized that the low frequency is an issue. So what we did in 2017, we hired out equipment. In 2018, we purchased 2 Class 1 sound level meters with integrated frequency analysis to deal with the low frequency music noise. The staff have undergone training, relevant training to utilize this equipment. Also, we simplified the description of the noise monitoring locations by giving defined addresses. If you looked, if you looked at Appendix 2 on 762, it will give you a definitive address of 3647 Sisters Road. Before, in the license itself, it kind of really looked like you need to take a geography lesson to find out where you would have to set up the sound level meters. So that was actually discussed with the licensees and also Vanguardia at the time. We agreed with the organizer to utilize Condition 108 to restrict the low-frequency music levels. 6, we encourage complainants to complain in real time so that we can visit them to assess the music noise or low frequencies. We utilize real-time communication via WhatsApp groups. 7, we monitor the low frequencies at 125 Hz and 63 Hz, and also we provided complainants with feedback or complementary forms to enable us to review the procedures in going forward. And that slip will be Appendix 6, and that's on page 774. Right. I have also included in Appendix 5, which is on page 772, a summary of the music noise complaints relating to wireless festivals from 2015 and to 2018. This is real-time complaints. This summary documents real-time complaints which officers can respond to and investigate during the event. I'm conscious that it will be virtually impossible to hold large-scale outdoor music events in Finsbury Park without some impact on the local residents or residential surroundings. With various artists, different genre of music, and changes in atmospheric conditions, there is the potential for residents to be periodically disturbed by the music noise levels or even the low-frequency music noise. That may have been the case in Wimberforce Road. During the event, officers worked with the premises license holder, acousticians, and sound engineers to minimize such effects. However, if I am to consider the total number of noise complaints received during the 2017 wireless event, which is on page 773, Appendix 5, which was 20 complaints, I do not believe that the licensing objective, the prevention of public nuisance, is being compromised. Nevertheless, I believe that good is not excellent if better can be done. And in going forward, I'd like to make the following suggestions. This would be Condition 106 on the premises license to be amended with regards to the representative locations. Remove the notes and apply door numbers to locations. So it should read 364 Seven Sisters Road, 16 Adolphus Road, opposite number 77 Woodstock Road, 204 Stapleton Hall Road, 19 Lothair Road South, and last but not least, a proxy position opposite blocks 278 to 334 Rowley Gardens, and that's all in N4. Condition 107 should remain the same, and that's that the sound level should not exceed the above background level, by more than 15 dB when measured at a 15-minute LEQ. With respect to low-frequency music noise condition, the maximum low-frequency music noise level shall not exceed 90 dB LCEQ over 15 minutes at any 1/3 octave frequency band from 40 Hz to 125 Hz outside the representative locations, which are 6 locations, 3 in Hackney, 3 in Haringey. The licensee shall require the sound engineer to take remedial action to reduce levels on receipt of substantiated complaints of public nuisance. Also, the base music noise level shall be monitored and assessed during the event, and if the levels are such as to cause a noise nuisance within noise-sensitive premises, the licensee would liaise with the local authority to reduce the bass music noise to an acceptable level. Thank you.
Yes. Okay, a couple of questions on that. I think Councillor Corley-Harrison. Not What? By what? No. I'll talk to you about something else in a minute, but Councillor Crawley-Harrison.
Thank you. I just wanted to ask about the data that's shown in Appendix 2. So that starts at page 762. So these appear to be manual logs, I think, of the sound levels at the various locations, which indicate a report of those logs at certain time points. Are the locations monitored continuously and actively continuously throughout the day, or are they only monitored when an individual approaches that particular location? And therefore, is there only one location actually being monitored of the 6 at any one time?
Historically, what we would do initially, we would go around all 6 of the locations randomly, somewhat like headless chickens. One of the reasons why we do that, we will try to work out where sometimes you might have prevailing winds, and we may have to change where we would focus our monitoring. So initially, when we arrive, we would we would do the 6 locations, 3 in Hackney, 3 within Haringey, and dependent on where we perceive the problems to be, we would focus on that. But most of the times, we are going around the 6 locations. Sometimes we may have a location which it's inaudible. If that were the case, then obviously we would not focus on that of returning. Seven Sisters Road, Woodstock Road are somewhat the problematic cases. Sometimes if the wind changes, we could be at different locations. At the same time, simultaneously, we would respond to complaints received from any of the boroughs, which we did do in 2017.
So just for clarity, page 764 onwards talks about the 7th of July 2018. So just in reference to monitoring location 1, which is Seven Sisters Road, which seems to be by far the loudest, I can only identify there one actual report of the sound level and no report after 2:36. Does that mean that you have no log of what the sound level was post that time on that date?
In producing this documentation, I have not included all of the pages. As you could see, it goes up to 1954. So if I wanted to include all of the pages, it would be a few pages extra in that sense. But no, we would have monitored Finsbury Park, Seven Sisters Road. It depends on where the complaints are coming from as well, because simultaneously we are at the same time responding to complaints.
Okay, and you can't remember what the records would be for that? So we can only base it on this one single record for that location?
Would appear so, yes.
So, okay, fine. Just to follow up on that then. So that record is 76.6 over 15 minutes. Let's assume that that is the average, as that's the only record we have. Do you think that's an acceptable sound level for someone to live through for what would potentially be 10 to 12 hours a day for 3 days straight?
I could only comment on the license. The level is 78, set at 78 dB at that location. So if I were asked if they were in breach of their license, I would have to say no.
It's just it's picking up on what Councillor Harris was saying. It's the same thing. The location 1 is the problematic one, I think. And then we see it seems to peak at 84.9. So would you say, would it be reasonable to assert that during the, it was fluctuating above the conditions as set during the course of the 2 days? Have I misunderstood? I'm looking at 763.
Right. That's in respect to the low frequencies. Yes, that's in respect to the low frequencies. As you can see on that page, what we did when it reached to 84, we actually contacted Vanguardia at that time to bring it down. If you could see, it says, sorry, if you could see that it says music level, and that was so frequency level was high. Contacted Vanguardia. So yes.
Okay. Is that right? We've also got Parks, I think, who want to speak. Is that right?
Chair, you've got my representation. I can illuminate it for you if you want, or if you're pressed for time, you can move on.
Mr. Colvin, can I have an estimation from you on how long you think your case will make?
To some degree in your hands, and I'm quite capable of being sped up if you say, look, we've got this.
So,
but if you don't, then I could be up to an hour and a half.
Okay, so we had two hours yesterday complete from all of them, but as you say, with you not bringing so many witnesses and not including the residents, etc., then I would assume that would be less. So 1.5 would seem kind of reasonable.
Yes, but I'm going to try and take it quite quickly anyway. And Mr. Charles has covered quite a lot of material.
Yeah.
Would it be possible just to ask one question, Mr. Charles? Because I do think there was maybe a little misunderstanding between Councillor Williams and Mr. Charles there, which I might just be able to clear up.
So my intention is, after I've heard from all of them, I'm going to allow both parties questions of them before we proceed.
If I don't, then Mr. Griffiths will clear it up.
Excellent.
Okay.
Great. Okay then. You know, a short illumination would be in order, I think.
Chair, thank you very much. As I previously said, Simon Farrow, Commissioning Manager for the Public Realm, which includes Parks. Our representation, we're not an RA. We are here in capacity as the landlord for the council, so we are involved in the hiring of the park rather than the licensing of the event. So the council has two decisions to make when it holds an event, and that's subject to a cabinet member signing in order to approve any event. First thing I wanted to say is events are held in Finsbury Park in a fairly tight policy context. The council consulted in 2013 across all three boroughs as to a new policy for events in Finsbury Park. The park has held events from the early 1990s very much on the scale that we do now, including much larger events. So there's been comments about Rise Festival. Well, in its heyday, Rise was pulling in over 100,000 people to Finsbury Park. So we do much smaller events than Rise, even though they're at 45,000. That policy has been subject to a great deal of scrutiny in its fairly short life. It has been called in when it was first agreed by Cabinet, and the Overview and Scrutiny Committee looked at it then, and the public and other bodies had a good chance to discuss it in public, and it made a number of recommendations, one of which was to establish the stakeholder group for the park, which has representation from all three boroughs, as well as residents' associations and stakeholders on. So there is an active forum, which has been quite hotly contested over the period of its existence, but it is active in trying to reflect and have a role in what is going on in the park in terms of event bookings. Furthermore, following the incidents that occurred in 2015, the Council asked the Overview and Scrutiny Committee again to look at events. And again, there was representation from all three boroughs on that panel. And it made a number of recommendations which have been implemented as we've progressed. The policy position has been further scrutinised in terms of a judicial review, a Court of Appeal hearing and a subsequent application to the Supreme Court. So the Council is in a position where its ability to hold events in the park as a landlord has been tested, has been scrutinised and has found to be robust. That said, the holding of any event and any development of any event management plan is a learning process. There are many moving parts in holding an event of this scale. There are many moving parts in holding a very small community event. And each year, progress is made to refine and change them. Inevitably, you do move one element of an event and something else not necessarily intended occurs. And we've seen that particularly in the last wireless in terms of extra resources into Hackney, created some displacement into Islington. And that's planned to be addressed. The catchment for Finsbury Park events we define as somewhere in excess of 20,000 people. Those are the people that we will contact about events as a condition of the licence. We have a wide network of which the Council directs communication to and a wide variety of stakeholders. And there are ongoing, I counted some 53 meetings that took place in the run-up to this year's events with a variety of stakeholders who get an opportunity to comment and feed into the process. Most recently, in this very room, there was a meeting, tri-borough meeting of both local and nationally elected representatives to discuss coordination of events in the park. Just to add some further context, the park as a whole receives around 3 million visits a year. So it's a very well-used park, and it is very well accessed by lots of different sectors of the community across all three boroughs. As has been mentioned, the majority of the park does remain open during events, and many people make use of that during that period. It does take out a large area which people like to picnic on, but as that was considered in the Court of Appeal, that this was a suitable use of the park in terms of both recreation and public access, as it isn't a private event. The park does have many issues. It's an urban park in London, so we do have drug taking, we do have antisocial behaviour. Most days you could find some NOS canisters in there, you could find some drug paraphernalia. As my colleague Mr Malcolm has mentioned, there are somewhere in the region of 200 crimes reported in the park every year. And therefore, it is a park with issues, as are many parks in London. I think in terms of the actual points, in terms of public safety and crime and disorder, they've been covered by many other people. And I think that's probably all I've got to say, Chair. Thank you.
Do behave, Martin Ball, please. Thank you. Right. Members, any questions on that? Yes, Councillor Crawley-Harrison.
Yeah, I just want to pick up on the number of complaints and the increase from 2017 to 2018. In your report, you state that the number of antisocial behaviour-related calls increased from 14 to 35, which is, I suppose, in ratio. And then go on to say this was in part due to a higher level of engagement and an increased confidence from residents that there would be an immediate response from the security team or cleansing team to their call. Just wondering what evidence or data you have to support that statement.
Thank you. So in the run-up to the 2018 events, there was a raft of engagement with Hackney in particular. There was a commitment to hold residents' meetings during the event. and there was a much larger security and staffing presence in those side roads, with a dedicated manager from Festival Republic, as well as a cleaning response crew, and therefore through that active engagement and that promotion of what was expected, there was, I would say, a much higher engagement with people in terms of, particularly from Hackney, in terms of engaging with that there would actually be something done should they ring in and complain about it. And they're not here today necessarily, but there are logs of those actions that were taking place during that.
Yeah, Councillor Williams.
Thank you, Chair. Just from submissions from residents yesterday, they mentioned the state of the large grassed area after wireless has been there, and what remedial measures are taken to protect the green space. I just wondered if you could elaborate on what you do to do that.
Thank you. Obviously there is a number of events that take place in the park, and like any open outdoor event, we are subject to weather conditions. So we can have very wet conditions, we can have very dry conditions. There are some sensitive areas in the park. I think it was referred to yesterday as Serengeti. There's an old first-generation AstroTurf pitch there which drains very freely, and therefore we have provided protection to that grass so it doesn't get worn away, particularly now that, as was mentioned, Stage 2 has been removed and it's part of the main egress route out of the park. So some of the ground is protected, and this year, if you'd been at the event, the main area in front of the stage was also protected in the same way. 45,000 people a day on a piece of grass does cause some wear and tear, and will cause some damage to it, as will the moving of equipment in and out of the site. So there is steel trackway that's put down, and other forms of trackway which allow the cranes and forklifts to move about in the park. Following the end of the event organiser will clean the area before handing it back to us at the end of their occupation. We make an assessment of the damage to the park, and we have tractors and other machinery on site where we can level the ground, we can seed drill the ground for new grass. But again, the recovery period is subject to the weather. So as we have seen this year, we had a very, very hot summer, and it has rained not very much since the end of the event season, other than the last event, which it did absolutely chuck it down and gave us the other end of the issue in terms of churning up this ground. We have a full recovery programme, so it has been levelled, and we will continue to do those repairs over the summer, relieving compaction. We've got some large spikers that go into the ground to relieve the compaction, and in terms of returning the grass back to a good state.
Okay, I want to move on to questions of the responsible authorities by the applicant first, if you have any, Mr. Stream.
Yes, so I do have just a couple of questions. Firstly, for Mr. Charles, in relation to pages 765 and 766 of the bundle, your Appendix 2, you just said that you didn't include all of the pages of your recordings. Why didn't you include all of them in the bundle?
Sorry, I miss. It's an error. They are included. They are. Sorry.
We don't have any recordings from between 8 and 9, which is normally the loudest time. It certainly was the loudest time the day before, if you look at 763. Why didn't you take any recordings at the loudest time?
That could be that we were responding to complaints, because, as I said, simultaneously we are responding to complaints as well as monitoring the noise levels. It's only one team of 2 officers.
It's a shame that the only period you're missing is between 8 and 9, not any other period.
what we try to do, not try to do, what we actually do with these events, and historically, we actually get the actual list of the performers. And historically, in monitoring the events from the wireless, the affected areas, Woodstock Road, has got a lower background noise level than Seven Sisters Road. So most of the times we will be measuring from Woodstock roadside. When it comes later, where the headline acts come on, they basically, with the levels would go up with the headliners, which come down in the evening time.
I'm not sure that had anything to do with my question, but thank you. Secondly, in relation to noise complaints, Mr. Skeets, who you heard from yesterday, can't be here, but he's texted those instructing me, and it's what he said yesterday, to say that he certainly made more than 2 calls, and he says he made those to an out-of-hours number, which he says is probably different from your in-hours number or from the wireless complaints line. Is it the case, then, that any complaints made to that out-of-hours number don't show up in your figures?
As I said, Mr. Skeets didn't make any complaints about music noise.
Yes, but the question is, when you said that, were you referring to a dedicated line, which we may be discussing, or were you referring to all contact with the council at all, including, for example, the general out-of-hours line, which people may also use?
I was referring to the general out-of-hours and also the response service line. We have no complaints about music noise from Mr. Skeets.
Right, so are you saying he's lying?
Well, come on. I mean, let's. To be fair, I don't think he's saying he's lying, and I'm not convinced that's a kind of productive avenue. There's a difference of opinion on that. I know. We understand there's a difference of opinion on that, right? Okay.
In relation to Hackney, Mr. Skeet says that there's a mobile telephone number that he has called and been told to call, and he says that very often rings out. He doesn't even get through to someone, doesn't get a reference number. Again, would those calls be recorded anywhere?
Are you referring to Hackney, you said? Yes. Sorry, Haringey, so... No, it wouldn't.
Ms. Barrett?
Can I just clarify, please, Chair, because I think people are getting lost in here. The promoter sends out a leaflet that has a dedicated complaints line number on that leaflet. That is posted through everyone's door. It's posted through Mr. Skeet's door. So if he chooses to ring that number, he will be able to lodge his complaint directly into event control for that to then be dealt with. If he chooses, there has been years when the leaflet has also had the council's out-of-hours noise service number. So also, in the same way, if he rings that number, the out-of-hours team, the enforcement response team, actually sends over information to the control centre to let them know that callers from Haringey, Islington and Hackney over this particular weekend, due to the festival going on, please accept all calls and put them through to the out-of-hours officers that's on duty for investigation. Okay? So the first protocol would always be the complaints line, but if he didn't use that, then the fallback position would be the Haringey out-of-hours enforcement response number. We know of no mobile number in Hackney that has ever been put on the leaflets. Right.
Okay. Mr. Sheehan, I'm not convinced this is.
I'm not going to say what I feel is already.
Yes, quite. Right.
I have one further question.
If you could turn on your mic, please, for that question.
One further
Thank you very much.
for the representative from Parks, and it's simply this. When you said that the High Court and the Court of Appeal had deemed the park suitable for events, that's not what they said at all, is it? All they said is that you have the power to hold events there. They didn't make any remark about whether or not it was an appropriate place to hold events.
Chair, to clarify my point there, the Court of Appeal judged attending a music festival to be within the definition of what is considered recreation, and they also judged that as it was free to anybody to go to this event, it was a public event.
We're going to have a legal argument.
Thank you very much. Licence holder, do you have any specific questions before we get to yours? Yes, please, Mr. Colvin, and with the mic, please. Thank you very much.
Mr. Charles, just go back, if you would, to page 762 of the bundle. Just to be really clear how this table works, if you look at the monitoring locations on the top of 762, there you've got the 6 monitoring locations set out. And then you've got the background noise levels as previously measured. So take, for example, Seven Sisters Road, which is 63. The next row is that level plus 15. And that is the noise limit set out in the condition, effectively. Then if you look below that, you've got all your measurements, and in the third column, you've got LAEQ value. Do you see that? And at the very bottom of the page, can you see monitoring location, time, and LAEQ value? And so if we look, for example, on the next page at monitoring location 1, that is Seven Sisters Road. We then read along, you entered 812, and you measured 72.4. And we have to compare that 72.4 with 78, do we, which is the effective noise level, noise limit. And then the same for all the others. You do the comparison, and then in the next column you ask MNL exceeded. In other words, was there a breach of the condition? Sorry, go on then. And you've then got a column which is MNL's exceeded question mark, and you've written no, 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 no. That's because there wasn't an exceedance. Right, okay. So that's whether there was a breach of condition, and we can see on all those pages that there wasn't. But then in the right-hand columns, you've got low frequencies set out at 40, 63, and 125 hertz. Okay. And I think the highest you found at location 1 in any of the locations, in any of the locations at any time was on page 763, 2058, and the 63 hertz octave band, you found 84.9. And I think you're not suggesting, just in case there's any misunderstanding about this, that that amounted to a breach of any condition.
Mr. Colvin, if you just turn your... I just want to make sure what Mr. Charles says in response to all of that is on the record for the benefit of clerks, etc.
No, that was not a breach of the condition.
Any contradiction in that at all?
No.
Okay.
Obviously, you've got, during the course of the 8th of July, you've got 12 measurements set out here. But you were asked, well, are any of the other locations monitored at any other time? Can you just confirm that while you're doing your job, Vanguardia are doing their job with a piece of equipment called a Matrow system, which continuously monitors at Woodstock Road? Is that right?
That's correct.
Okay, great. So we're just after 8:15. I intend now to move towards your presentation, please. All right. Sure. Okay. Sure. Sure. Assist the committee. Yes. Okay. Go on.
quickly for 15 seconds. It's a great treat to be in front of a committee that's read the papers and has got into the guts of it. So.
Cool. All right.
Okay. So can I just start, sir, by commending the officer's report before you. It sets out most of the background, advises you what's relevant, what's not, and has actually cut down my task. I can see that almost none of it has been challenged, and to the extent it was, Ms Barrett's dealt with it. So it's a very good start for me. We've put in 160 pages of material. Obviously, I might touch on bits of it, but I'm not going to trawl you through it. It would be insulting to do that. But in particular, we had a first response at page 811. At that point, all we had was the Friends complaint, which all related to 2017, even though it was only issued just before the 2018 event. So that's what Mr Taylor, who drafted that, was dealing with. Page 861 was the second submission, which I drafted, and I am going to focus on that a little. I'm not sure you can take it out, but if you could, that's the document I'm going to come back to again and again. So, can I please just start by summarising our position? First of all, we say that the licence provides a robust framework for management of this event. And as you've already seen, it requires extremely detailed planning on a tri-borough basis. It requires delivery in cooperation and under the beady eye of the three boroughs. And then it requires a tri-borough analysis of the lessons learned from the event. And when I say tri-borough, I would add to that the Metropolitan Police, the London Ambulance Service, British Transport Police, and so forth, to look at what the lessons learned were. And that means that when we come to a hearing like this, they are in an excellent position in providing you with an objective view on, magic question, whether the licensing balance is being struck, and the extent, if any, to which it needs to be adjusted. And you've got a lot of overview of what that planning and event management process is from Ms Barrett's report before you. Second point, my client complies with the licence and the 113 conditions on it under the command of Mr Ben, who's been coming to Finsbury Park for 28 years, starting with the flower, rise, wireless and so forth, and has got unparalleled experience in the industry of putting on events, including in urban settings, which he knows to be sensitive. There is no authority giving evidence before you, making reps or anything like that, who says that my client cannot comply with the 113 conditions on its licence. Thirdly, the most authoritative and neutral advice to you as licensing authority comes from the responsible authorities. And their report to you is that the licensing balance is being properly struck. Mr Streeton, probably recognising the mountain that he had before him, actually invited you yesterday to ignore their evidence. Well, we suggest that lacks realism and ignores the actual statutory scheme for licensing, which is a committee advised by responsible authorities. And in fact, it's the whole way local government works. So you couldn't possibly ignore it. But actually, I'm going to flatter nearly everybody in the room at some point in these submissions, you don't get a lot of representations like Mr Charles's, both the detail of the written representation and then the extraordinarily mild, professional and objective way that it's just been reported to you. That saves an enormous amount of time and will read really well on the transcript. Fourthly, their advice is echoed in the evidence submitted by my client, which doesn't include honeyed words from me, which is not evidence, it's submission. It includes independent audit work and also expert evidence from Mr Griffiths, who is the most senior acoustician working in this field with 1,500 large events under his belt. Fifthly, my client is not coming before you and saying that's the licence, yaboo, nothing further, not prepared to engage. It's the exact opposite. My client is deeply committed to continuing engagement regarding this event, and it remains alive to the possibility of improvements year on year. This year, that included a huge increase in off-site security, not because you ordered it, but because my client wanted to do it, from 14 to 93 off-site security. I'm not talking about egress security. I'm talking about people just put in place on the residential streets. That came out of a residents' meeting, not compelled, volunteered by my client. Next year, as in fact Mr Farrow has pointed out, by putting in all that protection in Hackney, it displaced some issues into Islington. So my client, using his words, will apply the same principles to Islington in discussion with Islington. It will also include, for example, an extra noise monitoring point, base level improvement, and so on and so forth, but I'll come and deal with all of that. Sixthly, I hope you don't mind saying, me saying that this event actually brings pleasure to 45,000 people attending each day. They are an important part of the cultural calendar in Haringey. I hope that Haringey is actually quite proud to have this festival, but it's also a significant contributor to the park's budget, which of course is not supported by statutory funding, as you well know. But, as everybody here understands, you can't run a large music event in an urban park without disturbing somebody. It simply can't be done. And recognising this, my client is asked to deliver information regarding this event to no fewer than 22,000 households. And you can see all of what's in the letter. I think it's at page 935. But the letter includes the complaints lines. I can check that reference if I'm wrong. Yeah, it's at 935, but it's actually a nice big colour letter. It just hasn't been copied very nicely. The complaints line, by the way, since you asked, when we put out the 93 people onto the streets of Hackney, 87 Hackney 6 in Islington, those people were wearing a lanyard round their neck, which had their instructions, which included, if someone wants to complain, please give them the complaints line, and they carried a little stack of letters with the complaints line. So my client, just echoing what Mr Farrow was saying, was trying to get complaints. He was trying to provoke complaints from everybody who had one. So against those 22,000 households who got that letter, and bearing in mind that this campaign against wireless at Finsbury Park has continued through many years, through litigation, web campaigns, the Overview and Scrutiny Committee, etc., and the review proceedings, which were published just presumably coincidentally just before wireless, for maximum impact, at the end of it, 70 households have lodged a complaint, essentially, to this review. And that comes out as about 1/3% of the people who got that letter, and that's in line with my client's experience of the percentage of people who complain wherever a festival is put on. Now, I'm not being unrealistic. I'm not saying that 1/3% complain and the other 99 and 2/3 adore wireless. I wouldn't dream of suggesting that. I'm sure that the 99 and a bit percent include many shades of opinion, from positive support to tolerance, live and let live, to passive dislike, I really don't like it, to active dislike, I'm going to make a complaint. But somewhere in that range of views, there is the licensing balance. And somebody has got to make a decision, weighing it all up, the benefits, the detriments, the locality, and all of that stuff. How are we going to allow this event at all, which is a landlord matter? And if we're going to allow it, where's the balance, which is a licensing subcommittee matter? And we say this balance is fairly struck, limiting the days and hours of the event and imposing a strict framework of planning and management on the organiser under the ultimate control of the London Borough of Haringey and the Safety Advisory Group, which comprises reps from all boroughs. Mr Street didn't seem to understand that yesterday. He wanted all three boroughs to be involved in the SAG. They're all involved in the SAG. And they've got the ability to flick the switch and say, stop this festival. It can't happen. So we've got to, every year, we've got the discipline of presenting our plans to them and ensuring that the plans meet their approval. Once the EMP, the Event Management Plan, is fixed, which is a month before the event, it's fixed in stone. We've then got to deliver. And there's even conditions currently on the licence, and which an even stronger condition will go on the licence, which will enable Haringey officers to say, I don't care whether you're complying with the condition. I think this is a nuisance. Bring it down. So that's a sort of override noise condition. Already on the licence, condition 108, but strengthened at Mr Charles's instance, or at least in discussion with Mr Charles, for 2019. At the heart of this exercise is Festival Republic, which just wants to bring a renowned, popular, world-class event to Finsbury Park each year delivering it safely and compliantly, working really hard with stakeholders, and trying to ensure that external impacts are kept within reasonable bounds. When I get to the end of these submissions, I want to just show you what the additional steps are which we want to take, the further, I think, 36 conditions which have gone on the licence because of ongoing engagement with Haringey and Islington, and which have satisfied the officers from Haringey and Islington as an authority. And of course, this is all subject to your views. We all know that anything agreed with officers is subject to your own views. You are the licensing authority for these purposes. We listened very carefully to what was said last night, and we do accept that there's an impact on the community. But that impact is limited in terms of days, hours, music levels and crowd management. And as I say, whether this should be used for this event is not a licensing matter, but the hours and the days and the music levels and the management standards and so on is a question of licensing balance, ensuring that the impact is reasonable, having regard to the duration and hours of the event. Secondly, listening to the Friends of Finsbury Park witnesses, we have to bear in mind that this application all related to 2017. It was just one of these curiosities. Mr. Vivian had looked at it for 3 hours in 2017. The statements related to 2017. But as a result of the engagement mechanisms in the licence, any number of changes had been made in 2018. So looking at 2017 was inevitably a rather historic perspective. The 2018 changes, fairly judged, were changes for the better. And thirdly, we've been very happy to continue to engage even during this process, and that's yielded all these new conditions. And amongst other things, what those conditions do is to strengthen and formalise the tri-borough approach. There's no reason for any borough to feel left out here. You happen to be in the happy position of having the authority, but it's a shared responsibility. We're happy for that to be formalised and strengthened. It improves engagement with residents. I should say my client has never turned down an invitation to attend a residents' meeting, but it also, you might think importantly, sets base level conditions for the first time in line with base levels required for other London Park events. So my client isn't trying to be cute about this. My client is suggesting a level which has been looked at and approved formally by other London boroughs which have parks which are very similar to this park in the sense of being nice flat sites with housing opposite. As you've heard from yesterday, the Friends of Finsbury Park did not wish to mediate with my client. It's their prerogative. But at 9:15 last night, for the first time, they put up conditions, and if those conditions, or most of them, if accepted by you, and if also then accepted by an appellate court, because that's where we'd have to go, that would end Wireless and Festival Republic's involvement in Finsbury Park. Things like pulling the hours back by 2 hours and those sorts of things would just end the involvement. But the conditions which we've agreed with the expert authorities which advise you in Islington, taken together with the improvements in 2018, we say are a more than adequate response to this case. So that's an overview. I might just come and look at some particular matters. Firstly, looking at my submissions, my second submissions at page 861, at paragraphs 9 and 10, I just set out a quick overview of what this licence does and its hours, particularly the entertainment stopping at 10 o'clock on Sundays, 10:30 on other days, supply of alcohol ceasing 9:30 on the Sunday, 10 o'clock on other days, and so on. So it is sensitive. It's not into the late night sort of licence. The 113 conditions. The second one I mentioned gives Haringey total control, and my client is very willing to surrender to that control. 3 and 4 are the SAG and the event management plan. It's perhaps just worth noting it's not my client chairing this SAG and the authorities coming in and they're sitting at my client's pleasure. It's exactly the other way on. The SAG is the statutory body. My client has to go and please the SAG. 12 is the noise management plan, and the noise condition which Mr. Charles, which is the background plus 15 condition, which Mr Charles has explained to you and we agree, is in accordance with the National Code of Practice. And it's the only code of practice. There's no choice of codes of practice. It's the code. So background plus 15 is in accordance with the relevant code of practice. The 13, the litter plan, this year, it was actually done by Hackney. We paid for it. So whatever they felt they needed to do, they did it, we paid for it. Next year, Islington want to take control of Islington's litter. So we'll pay for it. That's how it's going to work. 14 is the leaflet you've been told about, and 15 is the complaints record, which is then forms part of the SAG debrief, where everyone sits down and says, look, what's gone well, what's gone badly, and that informs the whole process of planning for the next year. As I say in my skeleton at paragraph 11, I quote from what this subcommittee said when it granted this licence, and which was then placed on the licence, about the importance of the EMP, the egress plan, etc. And then lots of micromanagement stuff, which the committee said, well, we can't condition that, but the applicant will have to address those issues, including things like provision of toilets and street cleaning. And then 12, we say the agreement, the landlord agreement, the licence and the event planning process are sufficient to regulate the wireless event. So that is the licence. And it's right to say for all large events, you end up with a licence which sets a framework, because otherwise it's every time you wanted to move a stage this way or that way or put a security person here or there, you'd need to come back for a variation. So for all large events these days, you get framework licences which set out an event planning process, and then the event unrolls. And you've achieved, we would say, an extremely competent and comprehensive scheme of control. That planning process, as Mr Farrow has pointed out, just involves endless meetings of the main SAG, subcommittees, residents, stakeholders and so forth. He's counted 53. I'm not going to argue with that. There's a list, if you can read 6-point font, at page 939, which sets it all out. But it's a huge amount of collaborative planning. In my skeleton, at paragraph 24, I then set out the Bible, and on to 25, I set out a Bible of management, which goes to hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of pages, that everybody is perfectly aware of what the event consists of. We haven't put the whole job lot in. We couldn't. A lot of it's commercially sensitive, and a lot of it is just boring, but it's the detail, and nothing is left to chance. So, for example, there's been criticism of access management, but if you look at, there's an access management plan at 3, there's a counter-terrorism statement of commitment at 5. NACTO came in last year and this year and looked at it in the light of Ariana Grande and all that and passed it all fit. 14, there's a security placement schedule, all the things which you'd expect to see. And my client worked extremely carefully with the Met, and what they do represents best practice. It was something said about drug searching. Well, it's as easy to get into wireless as it is to get into a Crown Court. There's a search arch, there's a search wand, your pockets are emptied. Those are the measures which are taken. So I'm not quite sure what's being suggested, but my client employs best practice. You're not going to find more stringent controls at any other festival in the country. Just dealing with access, there was something said about, well, that there's schools. On Friday, the music doesn't start until the teaching stops, so my client has timed it that way to make sure, because there is a nearby school. And on weekends, there's a pretty smooth arrival. We could have shown you the bell curve between about 12 and 4, by which time the great majority are in. And then there's very few festival goers on the streets until exit time. So you know, it's a bit like a football match. You know that crowds are going to come in, you know they're going to come out. In between, there's not a lot of festival goers on the street. The egress has been criticised. Well, you can see at paragraph 25, 1 and 2, there's an egress management plan and a timeline spreadsheet, as well as the 93 people I've talked about who are just guarding the residential streets. They are not egress supervisors. They are resident protectors. There are 219 security who are deployed to egress. All worked through carefully with the transport authorities, the police and the local authorities on the SAG. In addition to the police presence, there are plainclothes officers who were picking up drug dealers. And you can see it from the crime data picked up by plainclothes police officers. This notion they're only interested in machetes or whatever it is that's being suggested is simply wrong. They pick up drug dealers too. It's wrong to say they're disinterested. There was a rather unfortunate interlude when criticism was made of the medical provision. The POP Code of Practice, as it's called, suggests 40 medical personnel for an event of this size. My client has 54, including doctors, paramedics, nurses, and all the equipment you'd expect to see at major festivals. The suggestion, without any evidence of fault in relation to fatalities, is simply without evidence, and I'm sorry to say it, but a mite irresponsible and disrespectful. The circumstances will be presented in the proper manner to the coroner's inquests, which will take place, and I'm going to say no more about it. Security placements, the number of security on the site, the on-site security this year was 943 people. There's about 1 per 40-something people attending. So my client is not cutting corners or leaving anything to chance. It is properly supervising this event. Regarding crime levels, my client was specifically commended on this by the Met at the debrief. You can look at it if you want. It's page 1063. It's far lower than in some previous years. And, of course, there is no Met representation to this review. And when you asked Mr Charles why he thought that was, sorry, Mr Malcolm why he thought that was, Mr Malcolm said, well, he knows the police, he works with them on the SAG. It's because the police think that this is a well-run event from the point of view of crime and disorder. Points were made about litter. Somebody's put the litter management plan, or at least the first few pages of it, in the bundle at 991. There were 4 teams working midday till midnight outside the site. In addition to that, my client, of course, took care of on the site, as you'd expect. But my client also employed its own team just to respond to any residents who complained that someone had done something unpleasant in their gardens, because the Hackney team was a street cleaning team, so my client took responsibility in relation to gardens, including a jet wash facility. I'm instructed that was largely unnecessary this year because of the deterrent effect of the 93 security people who were deployed. At 945 of this bundle, I just thought it'd be quite nice for you to have a table of who the senior management personnel are. So that's gone in. But the head of that is Mr Ben, who probably needs no introduction, but his record includes Glastonbury for many years, Reading, Leeds, the V Festival at Chelmsford. He was the chairman of the board at Wembley Stadium for a number of years. He is now the chairman of the advisory board at Wembley, and he puts on events all the way up to the BBC Proms in the park, at Hyde Park, at Royal Park, every year since 2013. So the suggestion that he's not fit and proper is just unbecoming, and it's probably a little bit unfortunate too. So far as Hyde Park is concerned, lest there's any doubt, he wasn't hounded out because of conditions, as was suggested yesterday. There was a contractual negotiation, and Mr Ben chose not to contract. That's why he's no longer doing the festival at Hyde Park. In addition to those management grades, Wireless brings together a total of 4,500 staff, contractors, concessions, security, performers, entourages, and independent consultants like Mr Griffiths to make this event happen. During it, the hub is the control room. You've already heard lots about the control room. I say more about it in paragraph 28. When I say control room, it's a sort of control marquee where all the control functions of the event happen. But in addition, Haringey is sitting there. They've got their own complaints line there. There's liaison all the way through. There are SAG meetings. I think there's 4 meetings a day of all the different aspects of the event in real time. So that it's like if you go into a football stadium, you go up to the Emirates, you'll see exactly the same thing. Of all the different authorities working hand in hand with the operator to make sure that the public is protected. And you've heard this year, it may sound like a small thing, but it's an important thing, that all the noise work is being done on WhatsApp. so that if somebody's offside, oh, I'm standing in such and such a road, it seems loud, it's WhatsApped, and everyone can see it, people sitting in the marquee, Haringey and Vanguardia. And so everyone is aware of what's going on with everyone. And then the debrief follows, and that's the foundation for planning next year. So this year, what actually happened by way of improvement is set out at paragraph 36 of my skeleton. And there's all sorts of changes. We've talked about one. We've talked about two in the sense that the Matrow measurement system was actually upgraded this year. My client can not just measure the overall levels using the Matrow system, but can measure the individual frequencies. So my client is able to see, there we are on Woodstock Road, such and such turned the bass up, it's too loud, and so it can be brought down. Can I just correct something which was said yesterday, which came completely out of the blue, which is that a visiting engineer could just come along and override what Mr. Griffiths has set as the noise levels, what Haringey have set as the noise levels. No, that's not what happens. The visiting engineer can play with the mixing, but he can't play with the levels because the levels are set by conditions. And behind his desk, there's the Vanguardia desk, and it's controlled. I think it's a little bit like when you allow your children to play in your garden. You give them roam the garden, but you don't allow them to leap over the wall. I mean, that's what the visiting, if you've got a garden, if that's what the visiting engineer gets to do. We've talked about improved liaison. There's improved liaison with Hackney residents throughout the year and in the lead-up to the event. And this year, because the Hackney residents chose to engage with Festival Republic, and can I stress that? Hackney residents chose to engage with Festival Republic. And Festival Republic ended up doing a lot of stuff, like putting on lots more guardians in their streets. As a result of that, Festival Republic is going to put 4 security on the streets throughout the year, on Friday and Saturday nights, and also had a real-time meeting system with Hackney residents. So my client is desperate to engage, and that was a really good example of what happened. And it would just be a message which you might just wish to set down in your decision. Engagement produces results. Fifthly, the extra security in Prah Road, the geofencing of side streets, which is a way of saying that the Uber cars can't pick up in the side streets. They're wasting their time being there. The signage. Can I just add to that the toilet provision? Hackney, I'm not going to go into it, but the way the egress happened was just changed. And Hackney said, we don't really want the toilets on our streets because we think it means that people hang about. So my client at a place called Toilet City, which is the last thing you go through before you leave the site, increased the provision from 120 to 224 toilets. And that's not just toilets you go into, but it's also urinals, just stand-up urinals. So if somebody doesn't want to go in, they can just stand there. And that has obviously, as well as putting guardianship on the streets, has had a really good effect this year. And then other measures we didn't go into were mentioned in Mr. Malcolm's report at page 748. So there's a lot of stuff happens year on year. Compliance, I've already mentioned. 113 conditions. They are what keep things under control. My client complies with them. It's really easy if you're a nightclub and you say, I'm going to do X, Y, Z, just not to do it. And then no one ever knows unless there's a really bad incident, and then they find out that your crime scene preservation is rubbish and you end up in front of a committee. But there's no scope on this licence for breach because the event is crawling with enforcement officers, and quite rightly so. So compliance doesn't just mean no evidence of breach. Compliance means compliance. Can I then turn and deal with the views of responsible authorities very briefly? The police, no rep, but they work very closely with my client inside and outside this festival, overtly and covertly. And when you look at why, there were 40 arrests over the weekend of wireless, which represents a 75% reduction on 2014. 135,000 people in, 40 arrests. And that's not all festival goers. Some of them will be arrests of people who want to sell drugs outside. So it's 40 arrests in total. I think about half of those were minor thefts and a quarter were possession of drugs. So the police are saying, you know, this is 135,000 people come. this is not a bad stat. No reps from public safety. There were points made yesterday about public safety. No reps from public safety. No reps from child protection. No reps from trading standards. Come to environmental health and licensing. I'm not going to try and improve on the evidence which has been given to you. Can I just highlight, in respect of the licensing officer, Mr. Malcolm, he read you his conclusions, which were that there was the licensing objectives were not undermined, and that my client had demonstrated a clear willingness to engage and to learn and to improve, etc. The bit he didn't read you, I'm sure he was just trying to be quick, but I'll just deal with it now. He specifically said at page 748 that the stewarding of the side roads off Seven Sisters Road was significantly improved, helping to alleviate ASB down those roads. The stewarding was contracted out to a specialist provider. Numbers increased significantly. Roads closed, much more effective, and resulted in some positive feedback during stakeholder engagement on the 2018 event day. So that was his view, and he was there and watching that happen. Some criticism was made of the provider. Well, they're called ESM. They are a specialist security company, and they hold what's called ISO 9001 accreditation. Who around in its locality has that? Arsenal have got it, I know, and Fabric have got it as a result of their licensing difficulties. It's an international quality assurance accreditation for systems management. So these are good people. They can't literally stop everything, but they can deter, they can engage, and the independent evidence is that it's had a good effect. I won't say anything about what Mr. Charles had to say. I adopt everything he said as my submissions. It'll save a lot of time. While Mr. Charles was doing his job, the Islington ASB officers were also doing their job. And even though the rep is withdrawn, it's helpful to look at the evidence, which we can have a look at page 718 of the bundle.
Mr. Colvin, I think our barrister
I've missed something,
to
have
say. No, Mr. Colvin, if you could turn your mic off.
Sorry.
And allow our barrister to...
Just a short point of comment. I mean, if that representation has been withdrawn, it is not before you. And so my understanding is that on the basis of the conditions which you've had put before you, Islington have withdrawn their representation.
Okay. No, I can refer to what they've said in the past. I mean,
well,
I could produce it as my own document.
It's withdrawn. I think if it's withdrawn, it's safer to say it's not before you. That would be my advice.
It's withdrawn, Mr. Colvin. It is withdrawn. There we go. To your next point. With the mic, please. Thank you.
So where we are, when it comes to the views of authorities helping you out here, nobody is coming before you and saying Festival Republic is a bad lot, they can't do their job, they're not being compliant, or that the licensing objectives are being breached. Nobody. And that is important and powerful evidence in its own right. Can I then compare that with the independent evidence submitted by my client? 883, first of all. Well, I'm going to just say, by way of introduction, that all of it just bears out the reason why you're not getting negative representations before you. 883. My client, just in order to test itself, employed officers from Reading Borough Council to independently audit what it was doing. And 884, you can see that you've got two very senior officers, Mr. Masson with his 20 years' experience, Jodie Wilson, senior EHO with her MSc in Environmental Health and her postgraduate diploma in Acoustics, carried out an audit, and it focused, you can see from 2.4, on all the things you'd expect it to focus on. and they were allowed to write whatever they wanted to write, and it's been presented to you unvarnished. They attended throughout the whole operation, as they've told you at 2.1. And then just looking at it very quickly, 4.1, they thought the music noise was audible for the majority of the time, levels fluctuated, but generally they didn't consider noise levels intrusive to the point of view of statutory nuisance, but they did hear some swear words which could give cause for concern. They visited streets where noise complaints had been received and didn't experience excessive or intrusive noise. Noise and disturbance due to festival goers within local streets was minimal and low level. The noise was quickly managed by security. They were seen asking people politely to be considerate. This was generally well responded to, and so on. There was some beeping at the end of the night. 4.4. Well, in fact, we should look at 4.4, drunkenness. Only a few isolated incidents of drunkenness. The vast majority weren't under the influence. 4.5, NOS used openly. They thought that created something of an anarchic image. And 4.5.2, no signs of other drug taking were evident, for example, no needles or foil wraps. 4.8.6, the volume of festival goers was large. The air was very busy when the exit gates opened. The festival goers did, however, leave in an orderly manner, and the noise levels were not intrusive. 4.8.7, the security worked well for the residential streets. There was no evidence of misbehaviour on the residential streets, and both the officers felt safe working in the area, especially with the presence of security staff. And then 5.1, the conclusions. They thought that the measures worked well. They thought the security staff did their job and effectively exercised a deterrent function. 5.4, constant presence of litter and pickers and so forth. And then they made recommendations. Clearly these people were not everywhere at all times. They weren't actually ubiquitous, but they were there throughout. So in contrast to some of the evidence you've heard, this is not anecdotal. This is the summation of what they saw throughout the event. It's an authoritative appraisal of the true impact of the event. Then at 912, there's an environmental health report which covers all sorts of things, and you can see who the auditors were, including acousticians and food and water experts. If you look at 924, we see the brief conclusion on noise control, monitored throughout both weekends by noise specialists, many years working and so forth. Notes are in separate papers, but the conclusion was that the environmental health team worked to ensure that public health and environmental health standards within their remit and scope were maintained. When issues were identified, these were responded to quickly. I hope the recommendations are helpful. And then 925, it is in fact a best practice review as opposed to a beast practice review, which is what's written. But these are the noise people. It relates to noise monitoring and control. They found the Vanguardia team with the 5 consultants, 2 apprentices and a technician, the fabled Matrouse system, which measures the noise level off-site, as I've mentioned, and then they show a little map showing where all this happened. They visited 5 of the monitoring points. They took measurements. All were allowed within the limits. Turn the page. They're actually showing you the monitoring process. The reading at Seven Sisters Road, Adolphus Road, which is all compliant. Rowley Gardens, noise barely audible. At the bottom of the following page, the noise monitors fed directly into the Matrouse system, helped to set the off-site levels, allowing the consultants to send messages to the sound engineer when there was a risk of the noise levels being met or overtaken, and thus ensuring the M&L off-site was controlled effectively. So my client had this extra group of people, in addition to the local authority people, just auditing that my client was compliant, and it was. In addition to that, my client wanted the more subjective views of local residents. And engaging with Hackney residents involved setting up a panel of Hackney residents to receive feedback during the event. And I just want to say that my client will gladly do that during the event with residents of any borough. I mean, it's good. It feels that people have a say, have a route in. It's not just happening and they've got no control over it all. But actually, this is a pretty remarkable testament, given the sort of atmosphere that's been in this room compared to the atmosphere on site. So have a look at page 931, please. Residents in Queen's Drive, nothing to report. Residents' WhatsApp group was quiet. They normally vote if something goes wrong. Police were proactive. Comparison to last year is insane. Last year she had lots of complaints, but very happy how it's gone this year. Finsbury Park Road, saying security are good at stopping people going down the side streets, etc., etc., etc. Better than last year. Park House, better than last year. Really appreciated. Summerfield Road, noise levels better than last year. Floor started shaking around 6, but then shaking went down after that. Not as bad as last year. Doing a great job of listening to the residents and improving on their suggestions, which meant we've lost the ASB in the side streets. Wilberforce Road has 40 people on an email list. The reports issues into him. He didn't receive one complaint. Huge improvement on last year. His partner and his cats are happy. So that's a good result. And so it goes on. Finsbury Park Road right at the bottom, a lot better. So I think we can call that a success. Not every line in that is a compliment, but the clear balance is wrong sort of music, I know. You've got to admit it's getting better. It is getting better. That, I think, is probably all I want to say about the residents. I'll deal with vibration in a moment. Can I then just very briefly deal with the noise case? How am I doing, actually, for time? How long have I had?
So we're coming up for 9 o'clock now.
What time did I start? 8:15.
8:15.
Oh, I'm well on time. I'm fine. I'm going well within. Well
yes.
within.
Yeah.
Well within.
Okay.
So, first of all, Mr. Griffiths, I think it has been a bit of a feature here that there's been a little bit of attacking of. I mean, I've been under attack. Mr. Barrett's been under attack. Mr. Ben's been under attack. Mr. Griffiths has been under attack. You've been under attack. There's been a lot of attack. But I think Mr. Griffiths would just like to say something, because it was said yesterday about him that he was in Live Nation's pocket. I think that was the expression used, and therefore his independence might not be as pristine as others, and that might reduce, I suppose, the reliance that could be placed on him. So that's said in a public forum, and it's recorded. So I'm just going to ask you to look at Mr. Griffiths' biography at page 999. And Mr. Griffiths, is it right to say that you're a fellow of the Institute of Acoustics?
Yes, that's correct. That's correct.
You're chairman of the London branch of the Institute, and you have been awarded the Institute's Tyndall Medal for your contribution to entertainment acoustics?
That's correct, yes.
Problem with this method is that you'll either have to go like this all the time, or we won't have it on the
I'm going to put it into the
recorder.
And I'm going to ask Mr. Griffiths to say yes. Is that okay?
Yeah, okay, but I don't want the back and forth to go on for too long, if you see what I mean. Okay, all right.
Mr. Griffiths, you've pointed out that you've actually contributed to the very codes that we work from nationally. You've given evidence to the House of Lords Select Committee on a number of matters, including vibration, and that you've monitored and managed noise impact for pop concerts and festivals at more than 1,500 events. And is it also right to say that you offer your services equally to the industry and to public authorities?
Yes, that's all correct, and I do work for a number of local authorities and a number of local authorities in respect of noise control at the events.
So I want to just ask you, then I'm going to move off you, this suggestion that you might temper the technical evidence you give about the correct noise levels, the correct way of measuring and those sorts of things, that you might temper this or change it according to whether you're working for the industry or a local authority. I want you to comment on that, and I'd like, while you're at it, to stop ping-pong happening, how fatal that would be to somebody in your position.
Yes, I'm very much an independent consultant. As I say, I act up to the House of Lords for local authorities. I've never, ever been suggested to me ever before in the sort of 30 years of doing expert witness that in any way I'm in anyone's pocket in respect of Live Nation. There are a number of jobs, and this is on record, where I have refused to work for promoters and work for Live Nation in particular, where I don't think that we can meet the noise conditions, for example, or the noise conditions aren't right, and that is on record. So I value my independence extremely important to me.
Mike, Mr. Colvin, please.
I'm going to summarise very quickly the noise case. We have a September report from Mr. Griffiths, which has been looking at. Mr. Griffiths points out that my client met the noise conditions, explains that there are vibrations which tend to be a few seconds while the audience is jumping. This year, my client employed an expert to measure those vibrations, and they are at 1/10 of the level at which any kind of damage could be anticipated. We've put that in the bundle. And those conclusions about vibration are shared both by an independent structural engineer advising Haringey, and also Haringey Building Control. See your report, Ms. Barrett's report, page 12, paragraph 5.2. Mr. Griffiths also, and I'm going to take this quickly, dealt with Mr. Vivian's report, and I'm going to just try and deal with this very briefly and summarily. Mr. Vivian didn't visit in 2018. He visited only for 3 hours in 2017. He left his measuring device unattended, so he can't say what other noises were occurring. Didn't visit the majority of the actual measurement locations set out in the licence, and has made some rather basic errors with respect in his work. And when this has been pointed out by Mr. Griffiths, Mr. Vivian hasn't actually rebutted what Mr. Vivian had to say. But just picking out some key themes, he wrongly claims that the dBA measurements, background plus 15, dBA measurements exclude bass. Well, they don't do any such thing. The dBA measurements are designed to replicate the human ear, and the human ear hears bass. Therefore, the dBA measurements pick up bass. It's basic. That's what dBA measurements do. Secondly, he's misunderstood the potential power of the sound system. He said it's 78,000 watts. It's 30,000, so he's 260% out. Even then, he fails to understand it's not the power of the system, but it's the use of the system which determines how much noise is actually generated. It's like complaining about the power of a car because it's capable of breaking the speed limit. I mean, the question you've got to ask is, was it breaking the speed limit? It also fails to recognise the range of conditions controlling noise, including the overarching right of the Council to require that noise is turned down, e.g. to account for bass levels, as Mr. Charles pointed out. And it also fails to recognise that the quieter locations have got lower noise levels, as we've just looked at when I was asking questions of Mr. Charles, because the limits at the monitoring locations are set to take account of background levels. So that's Mr. Griffiths' work, and I'm going to ask Mr. Griffiths just to comment on the conditions when I come to deal with conditions. I'm going to pass over what Mr. Farrow had to say to you as landlord, but we agree with his analysis of this whole historic perspective within which this hearing takes place. But summing it all up, we do say that the consistent independent evidence before you, including from people who are experts in their field and have got a statutory role in advising you as a licensing authority, is that the impacts are modest, contained and limited in duration. And that is not anecdotal. It's based on their presence throughout, continued observation and an overall professional view based on experience of these sorts of events. Now, there are a number of other points made last night. A suggestion of an assault by security, the reasons for leaving Hyde Park, and so on and so forth. I'm not going to deal with anything. If I've missed anything out, please tell me and I'll deal with it. Now, can I just say a word about the benefits of having wireless? Because you are asked to consider the benefits to the community in national guidance, in deciding on being asked by national guides not to set disproportionate conditions in case you deter events which are valuable to the community. I have set out benefits in paragraph 45 of my skeleton argument, and I've set out 11 benefits, which I will not read to you. But can I make this more perhaps important point than any of that? Haringey, I'm not trying to lecture you, but you know, and Haringey's website says it, is a young, ethnically diverse borough. It's one of the most diverse in the country. And Wireless reflects and celebrates those features. It is a milestone in Haringey's cultural calendar. It doesn't cater to all tastes. But if you look at this great city we live in, these events do happen, whether you're talking about the Notting Hill Carnival, All Points East, the Lambeth Country Show. Not everyone likes them, but they happen. There is an impact. And you can do two things. You could say, we don't like impact here, and shut it down. Or you can work out what the line is. And you can plan and control for impact through the experience of the licensees team and its mature relationship with the established Safety Advisory Group. One of the witnesses last night did not think that Wireless was a celebration. And we beg to differ profoundly. It is a celebration of grime music, which is loved by a lot of people. It's the most streamed music in the world, and it is a music genre which emerged from London, from the estates, from the inner city. It is London music, and therefore this festival celebrates the music of the people, some of whom Friends of Finsbury Park claim to represent. And we hope, as we said, that Haringey feels proud to host this event, which will go a bit further. It's not a celebration for Friends of Finsbury Park, but Mr. Ben, who's got vast experience of this, instructs me that it's the only festival in the world which fully represents the community in which it is based. I wanted to say England, but he said no, in the world, in the sense this is London music, a London festival. That's how important this festival is. And what this underlines, listening to some of the evidence yesterday, is that much of this objection is about who likes what vibe. One witness likes Notting Hill. Said he felt safe in Notting Hill. Well, Notting Hill this year there were 395 arrests and 37 knives were seized. One witness liked the Queens of the Stone Age because she said it's a nicer vibe. But licensing is not about stopping events on the basis of vibe. That is a very, very slippery slope for a democratic authority. My client feels very strongly that Wireless is a necessary event for London, feels that Finsbury Park is an apt location for it, having regard to its demographic, and is deeply committed to keeping it there. As I've said, Mr. Ben's been in this park, there or thereabouts, for 28 years. He knows the site intimately, and he could walk away. But he's deeply committed to engaging maximally with the authorities and with the community to the extent that they wish to engage with him to ensure that the impacts are minimised and the celebration is maximised. I hope you don't mind me putting that position. It's a very important one to Mr. Ben. Ongoing improvements for 2019. We can speak of a number. My client is going to review the noise monitoring points and add to them. I think it's one to be added in Islington. Is that right?
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay. Ensure that we continue to be representative of the noise-sensitive locations around the park. We will remeasure the background levels to ensure that they continue to be set at 15 dB above background and not just 15 dB above some former background. As Mr. Charles has said, we've no particular reason to suppose that it's all become quieter, but we're going to test that. Thirdly, my client will introduce set base levels, not just 2 kilometres from the park. This happens on many London sites, and the conditions have been agreed with your expert advisors, of course subject to your views. But the level that we've agreed with Haringey is where you've got levels around the park as opposed to 2 kilometres away, the level in London parks is 90. So my client isn't trying to nudge it downwards. That's the level applying across London parks, which have levels for sites around the park. Fourthly, my client will be paying for Islington to carry out its own cleaning operation. I wouldn't dare say what Islington said about Hackney's cleaning operation because the rep has been withdrawn. But Islington will be paying for the cleaning operation. We'll be paying for Islington's cleaning operation next year. Fifthly, we will be increasing security on the Islington side of the park on the same street guardianship basis as requested by Hackney this year. And, of course, security will be accredited and audited in the same way as auditors happened this year. Sixthly, because it was asked for, it's not strictly attached to the licence, my client will introduce year-round security on Friday and Saturday nights in Hackney. And seventhly, my client is dealing with the Met about whether the helicopter can be replaced by a drone. It's a Met matter. My client's got the drone. It's a question of whether the police want that to happen. All the conditions which we're going to look at now have been conscientiously worked up with Haringey and Islington. And you can take comfort from the fact that when there are conditions on a licence, my client complies with them. So let's look at the conditions. And I think probably what's worth doing is getting the licence up and then just putting the conditions up against the licence. The licence is at 317. And firstly, the Islington conditions. So just to make it clear, obviously, 317, no change, hours and activities. If we go past the mandatories to 322, second paragraph, before the event takes place, the EMP has to be finalised to the satisfaction of the SAG. And then we've got a whole bunch of prevention of crime and disorder conditions, which remain, obviously, exactly the same. Then we get a revised 12 and 13, essentially to make it clear that the agreement of the TMP and the TMO is on a tri-borough basis. And if I can just make this clear, which is very important, at condition 17, it's my client who picks up the entire cost of the traffic management plan and the traffic management order. So obviously my client is delighted to do that. Please could you just note conditions 30 and 35 because they're crucial. The consent of the licensing authority has to be given for the proposed event to take place. And 35, no change to the finalised agreed EMP 1 month before the proposed event. So that sets it in stone and everyone knows what they're working to. Then, back to the Islington list, I think 14 to 17 are the same. 63, though, is different. It makes it clear that all 3 boroughs have to participate in the waste and litter management plan. 71, ditto. The agreed number of SIA and stewards at agreed locations outside the park. In the 3 boroughs. And then 80, I think 75, 76 and 81 are pretty well the same. 83, 84, 85 are the same. And then 86, the licence holder provided an agreed number of SIA and stewards agreed locations outside the event site to ensure concert goers don't exit into the park into residential streets. So we've got these 2 lots, but they've all got to be agreed by all 3 of the boroughs. And that's a discipline. If it's not agreed, my client can't run the event. And then new conditions, A, B, C and D. So meetings with the tri-borough officers, monthly to receive feedback on the EMP, etc. Consultation meeting with local residents 2 months prior to the first event. Debrief meeting within 4 months of the final event each year to receive feedback. And then meetings each day of the event each year to receive real-time feedback on the event. So this is, my client's delighted to do this anyway, doesn't need to be told, but my client, there would be in the condition, and you would leave this with the assurance that that is what is going to happen because you have said so. And it's difficult to overemphasise. Islington made an objection, which is no longer before you, but it was an objection by the borough of Islington. It had some things to say. It's really important to stress to you that on the basis of this bit of paper, Islington was content to withdraw its entire representation on this review application. And Jan Hart, who made that objection, is no slouch. She's a very senior public protection official, member of the Nighttime Commission for London, and so on and so forth. She knows what she's talking about. She has withdrawn this representation. It did not consider that more was needed despite its audit of the event and its engagement with its own residents. And you ought to be able, I say, to take great heart from that. So far as Haringey is concerned, there are 32 conditions which are additional, all new conditions. New condition 1 is by way of saying not only can the event not happen without Haringey's say-so, but there won't be a say-so until the requirements in the licence have been carried out to Haringey's licensing officer's reasonable satisfaction. So my client's going to have to show how these 149 conditions are going to be complied with. Not, oh, you've breached, we might prosecute, but you're not even having this event till you can demonstrate how this licence is going to be complied with. Can't even commence. So that is a real discipline, and my client is delighted to submit to it. What follows is a directory of good practice for event management, which my client is happy to see recorded in conditions, including some of the things which were raised yesterday. For example, drinking water. I think my client has 108 taps on this site, which is commensurate with what happens at Hyde Park. Is it 108 taps? 108 taps. But there it is. It's in the licence. My client will do all that it said it's going to do, specific drugs policy, and so on and so forth. So this is worked up with great detail and care with your officers to assuage any concerns which you might have of any slippage, not that there's been any evidence of slippage in the past. The new conditions on this licence, on this sheet, are 31 and 32. And Mr. Charles has explained them. And can I just do my best? I know I'm running short on time, but if I've said something that's wrong, Mr. Griffiths will come in and put me right. 31 is the maximum low-frequency music noise level at the 1/3 octave frequency band. So those are the lower frequencies, 40, 63, 80 and 125. Shan't exceed 90 decibels. Now, can I help you here? If you look at all the London parks which have got festivals, there are 3 ways of dealing with low-frequency noise. Way 1 is not to have a condition about low-frequency noise, but just have it picked up in the DBA plus background plus 15 and so forth. And there's a lot of parks that do not have a condition. Way 2 is to say, well, my goodness, low-frequency noise travels a long way, as you know. And therefore, there's a 2-kilometre condition, or something like a 2-kilometre condition. And the condition, almost invariably or invariably imposed, is low-frequency 75 dBA. dB, sorry, not dBA, dB. The third way is to say, no, we're going to use the same monitoring locations as we use for the ordinary dBA measurements, and the limit is 90. And all the parks that we can identify, and these are parks that Mr. Griffith works on one side or the other, have 90 as the surrounding dB measurement for low frequency, including, for example, Brockwell Park in Southwark, which has got housing on every side. Clapham Common, which is almost a better example, because it's not a huge park, it's a flat site, and it's got some very shishi housing opposite, the sort of people that don't complain to you, go straight to the High Court. I mean, you know, proper people. On Blackheath? Yes. Blackheath? And so on and so forth. We can give you the full list if you want it. But the only parks that have a condition, noise surrounding the park, 90 is the level. We can't find the 85, which was just yesterday. We can't find that at all. So we commend that to you. Your officer commends it to you. Mr. Griffiths, who works on both sides, commends it to you. And you've got the comfort of knowing that's the number which is accepted where numbers are taken in other parks. Now, in addition to that, your officers have suggested this, which is number 32. The bass music noise level shall be monitored and assessed during the event, and if levels are such as to cause a noise nuisance within any noise-sensitive premises, the licensee will liaise with the local authority to reduce the bass music noise level to an acceptable level. So that's an overriding condition. It doesn't say you've got to breach 31 and 32 for there to be a breach. They are each freestanding. That enables a Haringey officer to go in, monitor and assess, and say, that's a noise nuisance, bring it down, even if it's within the limits. It was already on the licence for noise generally, but here it's being specifically put on the licence in relation to bass noise. I was trying to write down when Mr. Charles was talking about that condition. I think he may have added a sentence. I'm sure we can talk about it at some point. But the sentiment behind that is a very powerful sentiment indeed. And given listening to the evidence yesterday, people say, well, it's the bass, it's the sash windows, it's the clinking glasses, etc. This is a very powerful condition. Can I put it in a bit of context? Usually when noise experts turn up on site, they tell people they know are there so they can do joint measurements. Well, Mr. Vivian elected not to do that. But he claims that he had a moment where, listening to one of the artists, the bass level was at 97. Do you remember he said that? It's also in his report. This brings it down to 90. So that's important. And not only does it bring it down to 90, but even regardless of that, if the officer goes in and says, I just don't like this level, the bass level, as far as I'm concerned, is too high, they've got total power to WhatsApp and say, bring it down. So we say that is a very, very powerful set of conditions. The upshot of this work is 149 conditions. It provides a very far-reaching code of control across the 3 boroughs. Can I just add to this, without disrespect to anybody, that Haringey's position is based on actual participation in the SAG and live monitoring of the event. LBI's position is based on actual participation in the SAG and audit of the event. That we also heard from Hackney councillors. I don't think that they would say that they are Hackney Council for this purpose. They are councillors. But they're not based on participation in the event or audit or any of the expertise which goes into being a statutory authority. The concerns they identify are understood, of course, but they are more than sufficiently answered by the existing licence and as augmented by the 36 further conditions which are satisfactory to the 2 other authorities with which they have been agreed. Can I then very finally, before I reach conclusion, I know I've got my eye on the clock, just deal with the conditions which have been proposed for the very first time yesterday at 8:45 p.m. So first of all, there was a suggestion about it that this background plus 15 should be replaced by 75 at any noise-sensitive premises. Well, Mr. Charles has already dealt with this and why it actually doesn't work. But can I just add to that all the authorities are happy with background plus 15, and always have been. Secondly, background plus 15 follows the code of practice. Thirdly, as Mr. Charles pointed out, a blunt 75 would make matters worse in 5 out of the 6 monitoring locations. So it's completely counterproductive. you remember where the current background was set out, add 15. In 5 of the 6 locations, that produces less than 75. It is a hopelessly blunt condition. Background plus 15 in this situation is the thing to do. And fourthly, I would just point out it wasn't even proposed in Mr. Vivian's original report. It just seems to have been devised on the hoof. So that's that. And then there was a proposal for 85 for the low frequency, which I've already dealt with. There's then a number of conditions which are obviously just designed to close wireless down. And so I'm just not going to say anything more about them. Things like pulling the hours back in, taking 80% off the capacity, those sorts of things. That's really an existential point, really. They want the number of events to be reduced to 12. Well, they're currently at 6, so it's, under this licence, so that really is a waste of time. Anyway, the council has got to sign off on the events. They can't happen without the consent of the landowner in any event. They want to expand the SAG to have tri-borough representation. Well, that's just a complete misunderstanding. There's always been tri-borough representation on the SAG. They want an order that all the authorities have to attend all the SAGs. Well, you can't order that because they might choose not to. They want stakeholder meetings with the same sort of condition. Well, the LBI condition covers that. There will be. There have always been stakeholder meetings, but then it will now be on the licence. Reduction of about 10%, I'll just pass over. A condition to increase the number of police present. Well, you can't condition how many police present. It doesn't matter if they're Met Police. It's just completely unrealistic. They want a stronger drug searching policy for interesting reasons, which have not obviously occurred to the Met Police officers who police this event. They want drinking water available for free. Well, sorry, one of them hasn't been. There are 108 taps, as I've said. They want cigarettes not to be sold. Well, there's a litter policy. They want the damage deposit increased. Well, my client is contractually obliged to pay for all damage. And if it's more than 30,000, my client pays for it. Anyway, it's a landlord and tenant matter between Mr. Farrier and my client. My client doesn't shirk that. It's bound by it. They want all workers to be suitably equipped with the tools, which is a matter of health and safety risk assessment. It's a complete waste of time for licensing to micromanage in that way. They want to limit the build and break to 5 days. Well, there's a 10-day build. 5-day build is unattainable for this event. My client's got an incentive to do it quickly. This is just-in-time delivery of the sort that, I shouldn't say, it's just-in-time delivery. My client does it as quickly as it possibly can. The break is, in fact, 5 days, but the landlord is happy with it and controls it. They want an inquiry into any further deaths linked with the events. It's called the coronial system, whereby the coroner looks into death. It's certainly not a licensing matter. And they want a condition that all conditions have to be enforced and engaged with by all 3 boroughs. They are. They're all there all the time. So the conclusion, a very short one, the wireless events please a lot of people. They will never please all of the people, according to the adage. But they're carried out by a highly experienced operator and tightly controlled by a licensing framework and very experienced boroughs. They're carried out consistently with the licensing objectives, as you've been advised. They're carried out compliantly. They have the support of all the statutory authorities, and they're actively opposed by a tiny minority within the community. But the outcome of this hearing is salutary. There are 36 more conditions, all of which will be complied with, and which will ensure continuing improvement. National guidance asks you to avoid disproportionate measures which could deter events that are valuable to the community, such as live music, says national guidance. You'll find that in paragraphs 2.17 and 10.10. This is a case in point. My client has given as much as it can, has engaged as much as it can. It doesn't have any more wriggle room on any of the fundamentals, but we respectfully submit that no further steps are appropriate or proportionate, but that what there is enough. And those are my submissions. Thank you for listening to me.
Thank you very much. No round of applause for you.
Oh, no.
There we go. Yes, yeah, very good. Right then. Members, any questions on that then? Councillor Corley-Harrison first.
Thank you. Right at the offset, you said that the event management plan was set in stone before the event. But from the written representations, there's a number of cases where things didn't go to plan. And it seems to me, reading this document, that was down to decisions or management errors where people deviated from the plan. Perhaps you could just comment on that.
A month before the event, except with the consent of the licensing authorities. So just say for the sake of argument, there was some emergency which caused you to change the egress. You'd have to do that with the consent of the licensing authority. There have been incidents where things have not gone perfectly to plan, but that is true of any live event involving people. It does inevitably happen, and all we would say is that you've got to look at the overall management, the overall competence, and then the way, if there is something which doesn't go to plan, that is then handled to ensure that the public are protected. So I will not sit here and pretend to you that there's literally never been an issue. It just can't be, because you're dealing with 50,000 people, 45,000 of whom are guests and 5,000 of whom are staff. So I'm not going to try and whitewash this, but I am asking you to look at the bigger picture. If something does go wrong, then of course there's the remedial mechanism of everything happening in the event control room, the SAG debriefs which take place during the day, and it is put right the following day. So that's the way the event works. Sorry.
A second question is on noise, and it refers to the vibrations. And I think that the applicant sound expert mentioned the 20 hertz range, didn't dispute the fact that the jumping would cause vibration, but added that the 20 hertz range would add additional vibrations to properties in the area. And I don't know any conditions on the 20 hertz or any recording of the 20 hertz range, and I'd like you to elaborate on that level, which it was suggested maybe outside of the human ear range, or to that extent.
I'll ask Mr. Griffiths to deal with this. Probably want to hear from him rather than me. But I think there's the 40 upwards range, which is a music range, and then the lower range, which is the jumping range. But can I get Mr. Griffiths to deal with it?
Yes, the first point, absolutely. With people jump at 2.4 hertz. They can only jump at a certain speed because of gravity. And that's what we did measure when we did all the vibration measurements this year. But quite rightly, as well as low-frequency noise, the dBA does measure as your ear would hear it. But you do get secondary effects. And the secondary effects for low frequency can be windows rattling, and it can be even get room modes. For example, some of the residents may well have experienced this, whereby they actually go into the house and it sounds louder than it does outside because some of the wavelengths are so large, you can get that in your room, what was called a room mode. So to look at that and to counter that, we've got a condition of starting at 40 hertz, quite a narrow band, which picks up all the low frequency. You get very little energy below 40 hertz. The sound system won't generate much below 40 hertz. Your instruments are generally the kick drum at 40, 50, 63 hertz, all of that which would be measured. So if you go much below that, you're really just measuring what I would define as world noise, the noise in the environment. But the advantage of doing quite discrete bandwidths is you're actually filtering out some of the background noise, but just getting in the low frequency. So you're absolutely right. You've got the 2.4 hertz, which is the vibration, which people do feel from time to time, and it is disturbing when they feel that. And then there is the other factor, which is the low frequency, which you hear, but also has a secondary effect where it can rattle windows. And the idea is to try and get that to a minimum.
Just want to ask on crowd size, actually. And the limit for the licence is 49999. That includes staff, which is about 5,000, say 45,000, let's say. But in 2017, it was reduced to 37,500 due to the Finsbury Park station. And obviously, wireless still operated. you made reference in your representation to wireless being unable to operate if some of the conditions by the Friends were to be agreed. I'd wonder whether you could comment on crowd size in respect to that, because it's not part of your proposed conditions.
There's nothing to give on crowd size. That year, it was down to 37,500 because of what was going on at Finsbury Park. My client did not make any profit in that year, and so he couldn't continue to operate in that way. If you want to get world-class artists into Finsbury Park, which is what Wireless does, then you need to have a 45,000 crowd to produce the artists. If you reduce it to 37,500 people, you will not have the Wireless Festival in Finsbury Park.
Just a further question on the use of expletives. Can you just comment on whether you're putting or proposing any conditions?
There is a condition, I think it's 54, on the licence, which says we've got to take reasonable measures. And the reasonable measures my client takes are that in the dressing rooms, it's explained to the artists that they should not swear, there's residents around and so forth. We also ensure that the artist's own promoters, entourage, agents and managers are all told the same thing. There's not a lot more we can do. Adele swore at the Brits, I think. Danny Dyer swore on breakfast television in front of Susanna Reid, which has got to be a crime. The artists will swear on stage. It does happen. My client does its level best to cut it out, but there is a limit to what can be done, and we acknowledge that.
Final one from me, for now. It's in respect to the additional SIA proposed for Islington. Yes. And I'm sure that Haringey residents will now say, well, why not me? Yes. So why not them?
Can we just get the Islington conditions out? Oh, no, it's the Haringey conditions, isn't it? No, it's the Islington one. Sorry. Yes, the new condition 86, the licence holder provided an agreed number of SA and stewards agreed locations outside the event site to take all reasonable steps to ensure concert goers, other local residents, don't exit the park into residential streets in Haringey, Hackney and Islington, detailed in the egress management plan. So this then becomes a question of assessment by the officers and my client, and agreement of the number. And if they don't agree, there's no event management plan and the event doesn't happen. So this just involves assessment. And as, perhaps I wasn't clear enough. What actually happened, as Mr. Farrow pointed out, was that having a great number in Hackney pushed some people down into Islington. It's conceivable, I suppose, I don't know, I'm just making it up, that putting a lot more into Islington will push into Haringey. Well, we've got to look at the whole global picture, and my client is perfectly committed to supplying to Haringey along the same principles as he supplies to Hackney and Islington.
Councillor Williams.
Thank you. I think Councillor Corley-Harrison's picked up on a lot of the points I was going to bring up. But just a quick comment. Both parties so far have referred to all sound engineers as male. And can we just watch our language isn't so gendered all the time? Because there are female sound engineers out there as well.
Sound engineers, did you say?
Yes.
So sorry.
Okay. Three questions. The drinking water issue I don't think's been really explored enough yet. If you could maybe set out a bit more clearly, because I noted on page 945 that we actually have a dedicated drinking water coordinator. I wondered when that post happened, why Haringey is considering new conditions around drinking water. Maybe if you just give some clarity on what the situation has been there.
I don't think that that the 32 Haringey conditions have gone on the licence because my client was being deficient. I think Haringey just wanted to provide assurance that we were exercising good practice in everything that we did, including drinking water. I think that's the purpose of this, but is there anything else to add to that? No, that's it.
At page 873, you mention New York Live Nation are considering offering apprenticeships to the young people of Hackney, Islington and Haringey. I wondered if you could give us some clarity on what considering means in these terms.
Councillor Williams, yeah, we employ about 20 apprentices across the company each year, and I took a decision a little while ago that actually in the future I would employ one from each of the boroughs in order to, as a wireless sponsored apprenticeship, and take one from, at least one from each of the boroughs. I'm pretty certain that we already employ some from some of the boroughs, but in some ways it's accidental because of the application process. This will be a very targeted, very focused application process to ensure that there is a guarantee of at least one. For reference, Councillor Williams, there are less than 20, this is in passing, less than 20 female studio engineers in the country, and I'm employing 2 apprentice studio engineers, actually based in Leeds, not based anywhere else, but based in Leeds, in order to increase that gender balance.
Very pleased to hear it. I hope you don't call those women he. Just a last point is about the sale of cigarettes on the site. Friends of Finsbury Park raised that as a possible condition. I can understand that it is cigarette ends are something which is quite difficult to clear as a litter issue from a grassed area. I wondered if you could talk about why really you want to keep that ability.
Just the amount of people then would be demanding to go back out in order to buy cigarettes would be insane. We'd end up with more people outside the event for the residents to complain about than we ordinarily would. It would just be impossible to provide for.
But I'm also, I've got to say, I'm just thinking of the practicality of this. I mean, the word would go out instantly on social media that those wireless people aren't selling fags. So people just buy their fags on the way in. It's not going to stop anyone smoking on site. It's just people get it in a different way. So we will clean up, and we will clean up to Haringey's satisfaction. And if we fail to, we'll be charged a lot of money by Mr. Farrow. And that's our job.
Thank you very much. Anything else? No. I want to actually grant a comfort break at this point. So 5 minutes, and then, or 5 minutes.
Yeah, Chair, it's also 10:15, and you'll have to decide whether or not to exercise your discretion for the meeting to extend beyond 10 p.m.
Yeah, that's right as well, yeah. I mean, clearly we are going to have to extend beyond 10 p.m. We've still got the applicant's questions to the licence holder and some other cross stuff that we want to do, and the summaries as well. So, yes, indeed, we will have to extend. Is there a limit on that for me, or there's no limit? Okay, great. Well, I would hope that I mean, yeah, I would hope to be out by 10:30.
Well, I mean, you can set time limits for everything. I mean,
yes, I mean, we'll discuss the limit on the summary when we get there, but the applicants will have to question you first. But yeah, 5 minutes comfort break, please, people. Okay, then, I think we're ready to go again. Please, everyone. Thank you very much. Okay, we've done our questions for now from the committee. Mr. Streeton, you've got the opportunity to question the licence holder on their presentation.
Yes, sir. I'm very grateful. I know that the member for Hackney has points she wishes to pick up. Would it be better to have her before or after me? Thank you, sir. I have questions, and they are all really for Mr. Griffith, so I direct them to him. My first question is that you're not disputing, are you, that Mr. Vivian is a respected, independent expert acoustician?
No, I'm not saying that at all, and nor have I ever said that.
In terms of your evidence, it doesn't include an expert declaration of the sort that you would include if you were acting as an independent expert, does it?
It includes what I would normally include, stating my credentials in terms of who I am and what I am. If you want me to add a section on being impartial, then I'm very happy to state that. But that is what I would normally do as a report.
Well, my point is it doesn't contain the expert declaration that you would be required to give if you were in court acting as an independent expert.
No, I'm not in court at the moment.
It's also right, isn't it, that you're a company director of Vanguardia, and your report at paragraph 5, or page 5 rather, deals with your long involvement with Wireless Festival, and therefore both you and Vanguardia have a financial interest in the continuing commercial success of the Wireless Festival.
Yes, I'm one of the main directors of Vanguardia. We, of course, get paid for doing the work we do. The amount that we get paid in relation to all the other types of work we do is very, very small. We don't rely on this type of work. I design sound and acoustic systems all the way around the world for major arenas and stadiums, one just being 2 miles away. So we don't rely on this particular work, but of course we get paid for doing that work.
And because of that financial interest, you could never be an independent expert because you have that interest.
Yeah, Mr. Streeton, again, I think we're in a situation that, well, the point was kind of made within the first couple of seconds, wasn't it? I mean, it was also made in previous comment in a different stage of the meeting. I think it's been dealt with, and I'm not convinced that kind of you going back and forth with it. I know what you're doing. I get the point. Yeah, I'm just not convinced that you going down that avenue is going to be any more beneficial for us.
So I'm done with that particular point. It was one of the 5 areas I wanted to deal with.
Right, I know he gets paid for his work, yeah?
Yeah.
All right?
I was criticised for opening on the basis that he wasn't impartial, and I dealt with that in questioning as a result. My second area, and I'll tell you what areas I want to deal with, there are 4 remaining: methodology, base, nuisance and conditions. Those are the areas I want to look at. Dealing with methodology, you've criticised Mr. Vivian for his methodology, but you've not presented any continuous noise data of your own before this committee, have you?
Data was provided for the debrief for 2017, and that should be in the pack, but if it isn't, I apologise.
Is that continuing noise recording data?
Yes, we had continuing noise data and spot measurements at all the 6 sites.
You don't have continuing data for all 6 sites. You have continuing data for 1 site, don't you?
That's correct.
And in terms of those other sites, if there's nobody monitoring them at a given time, you can't know whether or not you're complying with your conditions.
We have a very good idea we're complying with the conditions because we know what the noise level is at the front of house mixer position. And we know that we do sound tests the day before, so we know what the correlation is between the mixer position and the off-site locations. So unless the noise level goes up significantly at the mixer position, then we would be pretty sure that the other conditions are complied with.
But you can't know, you're not monitoring whether or not they're complied with, and if something like the weather changes, then you don't know what the impact of that is.
The weather changes over the distances we're talking about, which is about 150 metres, would have no impact on close monitoring positions. It only has effect over long ranges.
In terms of your criticisms of Mr Vivian's report in relation to the risk of extraneous noise, he deals with this in his report at paragraphs 5.4 and 5.5, doesn't he? He has a correlation between the monitoring which he carried out that was attended and not attended, and says that they back each other up.
I believe he does, yes.
And you don't have any reason to doubt the correctness of that correlation, do you?
There was no correlation between the Seven Sisters Road, the position which is agreed in terms of the representative position, and the measurement taken up on the balcony.
Turning to the question of base, you criticise Richard Vivian for his approach to base, and in particular his suggestion that A-weighted measurements are not entirely representative of base noise, don't you?
I criticise what he says. What he says is it effectively excludes base. That is incorrect.
Right, well, let's just see what your actual position is rather than a negative case, a positive case. You rely upon the 1995 Code of Practice at various points in your own report. An example would be 3.4, that's right, isn't it?
I'm sure I do. I'll check.
.4. 5.4.
Thank you. Yes, I relate to the Noise Council Code, yes.
It's right you contributed to that document as well, isn't it?
Yes, a lot of the research back in 93, 94, 95 was my research.
And if you turn to paragraph 9.11 of Mr Vivian's statement, he there sets out paragraph 3.4 of the Code of Practice.
Thank you. Yes, that's correct, yes.
And you wouldn't disagree with what it says there, namely that an A-weighted measurement can underestimate the intrusiveness of low-frequency noise. Low-frequency noise can be particularly noticeable indoors. Thus, even if the DBA guideline is met, unreasonable disturbance may be occurring because of low-frequency noise. You wouldn't disagree with any of that, would you?
No, I wouldn't disagree with that. What I disagree with is where the point saying it effectively excludes the base. Two very different points.
Right, well, let's just get to the right point for the committee so they properly understand it. Mr Vivian's figure 10 shows a graph of how it works. That's
Mr. Street and page number on that, please.
Sorry, that's page 134.
Thanks.
Yes, I've got that. Thank you.
That's scientifically accurate, isn't it?
Yes, that shows the reduction of sound level with over lower frequencies. What we are getting is a lower sensitivity with the sound level meter. This follows what your ear hears. So whilst that's the whole idea of having DBA, because it actually follows that curve. But the research that I carried out for the government, for DEFRA, we determined that the LAEQ was the best descriptor for assessing annoyance from entertainment.
Well, in terms of the human ear, firstly, that's not the only way in which one experiences sounds. You also experience it through vibration. That's right, isn't it?
That's correct. And as I think I said to the committee, that there is another secondary effect whereby it can cause resonance of certain parts of a building.
And it's also true, isn't it, that the human ear is increasingly sensitive to bass pressure as that bass pressure increases in volume as it gets louder?
Yeah, marginally, but generally it's a dBA, and when we're looking at levels of 70, 75, this A-weighted curve is fairly representative.
That's not my question, though, is it? My point is that the human ear does become more sensitive at those high levels, and that's something that the A-weighted measurement misses out, isn't it?
The A-weighted measurement gives the best descriptor for assessing music noise. That is a fact, and that is the research which is carried out for the government.
It's also not an answer to my question.
The answer to your question is the dBA is used in every licence condition in this country, and therefore it is the best descriptor. If there's slight changes in level as you go up in level, there can be, but there is no other better descriptor than the dBA.
No, so you have to use a combination of assessments. And just to make this point good, if we could go to page 763... we here have Mr. Charles's monitoring on the same date at the same time as Mr. Vivian, and at precisely the time that Mr. Vivian says there's a problem between 8 and 9, Mr. Charles looks at the LAEQ value, and it's 72.4 and 73, but the 63 Hertz value is at 79.8 and 84, and he says that that's high and contacts Vanguardia. He earlier described that as deemed excessive. So that shows the problem right there, doesn't it?
It doesn't show the problem. It shows that within the noise management, within the licence conditions, we have a very powerful condition. Condition 108. Condition 108 says that if the local authority feel there's too much bass, this is then using the subjective idea of your ear. If they think they can contact us and say, we want the level down, and that's what happens. So we're using here a combination of the LAQ and also a condition which is very, very strong. We feel this level's too high, regardless of what it is, and providing it's reasonable, we then reduce the low frequency.
But that's not something that's obvious and easily enforceable, is it? It's not a clear condition as to what an appropriate level is, that people can see whether it's breached or not. It relies upon the judgment of an officer on any given occasion, and you've heard how my clients feel about the exercise of officers' judgment on some occasions.
Can I just assist, maybe to a little degree? The Licensing Act 2003, Hearings Regulations of 2005, have two different concepts. The one is that you can ask questions with the permission of the committee. The other is you can't cross-examine except with the permission of the committee. You've given permission to ask questions. You haven't given permission for a court-like cross-examination to happen, which just can't possibly be. I mean, ask Mr. Griffiths a question, let him elucidate his position if it needs elucidation, and move on. Otherwise...
Yeah. Thanks, Mr. Cohen. I mean, in general, I kind of take the view that the parties can use their time the way they want. As you saw, I moved him on once. I was about to move him on then. I get the style you're going for, but again, I think the point was kind of made. You're talking about a difference between the dBA and the low frequency.
Yes, sir. As you will come to see, it's more complicated than that. You'll see it when I get to conditions, and I wanted to set the groundwork. I apologise if I'm ramming a point home that I need and move me on. I promise to take no offence whatsoever. I will also apply to be allowed to cross-examine if Mr Corbyn thinks that's what I'm doing.
Yeah, I mean, no, I mean, I did actually say that the cross-examination was permissible, so, you know, there's no issue from that point. But I think probably more helpful here, at kind of 7 minutes past 10, is that you kind of cut to the chase of what the point is. So I think committee members are kind of quite well aware and have been listening for the 6 hours plus. I get the style of the lead-in. I'm not sure it adds anything to the content, but use your time as you wish.
I'm grateful.
But, you know, I mean, at some point we've got to move on.
I have 2 areas left to cover. One is nuisance, that will be very quick. The other is conditions, and I want to make sure I get that right. In relation to nuisance, Mr Griffiths, you criticise complaints as being subjective in nature. Is that right?
I don't criticise it. I mean, if people clearly have, if they feel they've got a problem, they complain. And with a large sound system in a field, in an urban area, there will be disturbance. There will be disturbance for, in this case, 3 days. So, and I would expect there to be complaints.
And just in terms of a definition of nuisance, it's essentially a subjective judgment as to whether there's a reduction of the living and working amenity and environment of persons living and working in the area. That would be a fair definition of public nuisance, wouldn't it?
Public nuisance also looks at the time of day. It looks at a number of events, the time period, and the level.
So it's a question essentially for the committee whether or not there is an acceptable interference with the living and working amenity and environment of persons living in the area.
That is correct. I think the important thing here is that the committee need to consider, and I always say, is that the number of events. If this happened every weekend, I think they would have a very different view as if it just happened for 3 days. And that's something that I think needs to be considered. The number of events is very important in this case.
Is your position then that even if the committee accepts as fact all which they heard from residents, there will be no nuisance whatsoever as a result of the wireless festival? Is that your case?
It is quite clear from the council's own experts. The council's own experts, they say there is no public nuisance. That's one assessment. I've never been audited so much in any event. I've had Reading Council review all our results. We've had other people review our results. They all come to the same conclusion, that there isn't a public nuisance.
Right, well, I'll ask the committee to take a view on how credible that is in light of what they have heard. We'll move to conditions now. In relation to conditions, 5.4 of your report, you describe the conditions on this licence as at least equivalent to those on other licences.
Thank you. Yes, that's correct, yes.
But it's not true, is it? There are many festival licences that are more restrictive than this one.
It is true. Let us just look at the facts. This particular licence, we have to measure at 6 different designated locations. 6. At Hyde Park, we have to do 4. At Clapham Common, we have to do 4. And at Victoria Park, not far away, similar distances, we only have to do 3. So this licence is asking us to do 6 positions, and now, in fact, 7 positions. So that is a lot more onerous, it's a lot more intense in terms of looking completely around the park. That's the first point. The second point is that condition 108. A lot of licences do not have that condition whereby a local authority can say, this is too loud, whether it's low frequency, high frequency, we want a reduction. So I think that's a very powerful and a very fairly onerous condition.
Well, you act for Lambeth and you acted in Wireless's case in Westerville, and you know that there were base conditions imposed there. Lambeth in particular, you know that that was more stringent than the current conditions on your licence, and you're essentially misleading the committee on that basis.
I'm absolutely not misleading the committee. There are low-frequency limits, and the council said to me, exactly from the point I think you made, well, maybe we ought to have an objective number. Maybe we ought to have an objective number for low frequency. And you're absolutely right. We're seeing more and more low frequency limits come in. And I think some of it's generated because some of the equipment now can generate fairly high levels of low frequency, and I was not opposed to consider a low frequency limit, which goes in advance of also the condition 108, which again still can consider low frequency.
And you say that you've chosen the condition you impose essentially on the basis that that's what everyone else has. Is that your case?
90 as dB as a limit is something that is imposed in other conditions in London. Some can call it a DBC, which looks at the energy over the whole bandwidth, and some do it in third octaves to look at the frequency. Here I've suggested, with the Council having new equipment, we can actually do it in narrow band third octaves, so we can actually see the energy in those particular bands from the equipment. And this is quite useful in an area like Seven Sisters Roads, where you've got a lot of road traffic which will affect other frequency bands. This you can actually home in on those particular third octave frequencies.
It's not fair, is it, to equate DBC with those Hertz bands? You could have a condition which was a Hertz band of, say, the 40 to 60 area, and it had a 80 or 90 cap, the effect of which was, if you looked at it in DBC, it would be very much higher, up to and around 100.
What you will see if you look at the DBC scale is that the DBC actually has corrections, so it actually gives you a lower level than you would get if you were looking at the straight dB in that particular third octave. There's actually a correction of 2 or 3 dB, which would measure 2 or 3 dB lower in those particular bands.
And the conditions on other licenses are DBC, so they have those lower limits. They're not Hertz limits, are they?
The conditions are DBC, you're absolutely correct.
So essentially the condition that you're seeking to impose is more relaxed than those other conditions?
No, I don't agree. We're looking at specific frequency bands, measuring all of them. We're measuring the 40 hertz, the 50 hertz, the 60 hertz, the 80 hertz, 100 hertz, and 125. So that's not relaxed. And we're not weighting it, because the C weighting weights those lower frequencies. We're not. We are actually looking at each particular frequency. And you tend to, with a particular band, there's certain frequencies, depending how they tune the bass drum. So we'll either be looking particularly at the 40, sometimes it's 63, but it's not all of them all together.
You could comply with the conditions that you propose and have a DBC level at 97, couldn't you?
I don't think we could comply with 97, no.
Well, I understand that is the difference in tolerance between the figures you propose and the DBC. That's what my expert tells me. And so the point that I'm making is that you are using an incorrect measurement. You're comparing apples with pears when you rely on 90 under DBC, but here you're relying on 90 in the Hertz bands, and it's really important the committee understand that difference.
If you had 97 in at 40 hertz, you would not be complying. You would be 7 decibels over.
No, but you could have 90 in your Hertz, which would result in a 97 DBC reading. That's the point.
That is assuming you've got equal energy in all the other bands. That is not what occurs. You have particular frequencies depending on the bass drum, depending on where you get that peak. So you haven't got energy in all those other bands.
Well, it all averages over a 15-minute period, so it is theoretically possible. That is, I'm trying to show the committee the tolerance, and that's the difference, isn't it? 7 decibels over 90.
It's theoretically possible if you had all the same frequencies, all in the same bands over those frequencies, but that just doesn't happen.
And in terms of whether that's an acceptable limit to set, if we look again at 763, when you're looking in the Hertz band rather than at the DBC, you'll see that Mr. Charles's opinion was at 79.8 and 84.9, both of which would be below your proposed condition level, was not appropriate. He described it, as you heard earlier, as excessive.
I agree, and that's the beauty of the conditions that you've got here.
I'm afraid we're back where we were about 7 minutes ago. Where he's saying that there's an override condition, if you like, of a subjectiveness, which the officers can pull back, even though the reading is not in excess of a certain decibel level on a certain reading, right? So all I'm saying to you is we're back at the same point.
Well, so with respect, I say we're not, because he is looking to impose a condition which is supposed to be the absolute limit of what is acceptable in hertz. He says that it's 90 in hertz, but if you look at what the officer thinks is acceptable in hertz, he thinks it's below 80.
No, I get that. But you've got the condition, 32, is it?
But the condition is set higher. It's set at 90,
No, that's 31, isn't it?
Yeah, but the fallback, we say, is unenforceable.
Okay.
So that's the nature of our case.
Then that's your point, then?
You set your hard line.
Yep.
Yes.
Okay.
Right. Just on that point, on page 765, we actually see a level of 91.2, and 91.2 would be above the 90, so therefore it would bite. From your own experts' measurements, you're measuring 97. And again, at certain frequencies, that again would bite.
Mr. Streeter, can we progress this slightly? You did say that one of our visiting councillors wanted to ask a question as well. Is that correct?
Yes, sir, that's right.
All right. Shall we?
Last question, sir.
Last question.
The sound level that you're working on is essentially one which you have calculated not on the basis of the impact that will result to residents from that sound level. It's one which you have calculated as being the minimum level that will be appropriate, you say, for 45,000 people, so that they will enjoy the music and the musicians will be happy with the quality of the music they provide. It's not a level set designed to look after the people of this borough and to make sure that their interests are protected.
I don't agree. The level of 90 is a level where I've witnessed on many occasions, if you go above 90, you get the sash windows starting to rattle, other effects inside a house, so I think it would certainly be of benefit to the residents here.
Okay. Councillor?
It's more points of clarification, but I would keep them extremely brief. There was a reference in the submissions to the fact that the submission from myself was in my personal capacity as a ward councillor. That's not correct. It was made in my capacity as the cabinet member, so the executive member with responsibility for community safety, licensing and environmental protection at Hackney Council. It was a submission made on behalf of the council. It includes technical points around about noise stuff. It was put together by those technical officers. There was also a reference in it into what was included in the submission to where examples of where, I think in response to a question from Councillor Collie Harrison, to where things went wrong, and that was suggested that what the test of that was how they were then corrected. The example referred to in that is where they were not corrected in a way that we thought was satisfactory, certainly not in terms of real time. I would say that, as I was saying in my submissions yesterday, that the spirit of cooperation was much better this year, but that is why, having had our trust previously undermined, we are keen for the conditions to be in place. In relation to those conditions, under the revised set of conditions, there's reference in there to having conditions about a suitable number of barriers. Our concern is that phrases such as suitable number is open to interpretation, and our experience previously round about things where there is scope is that that has led to difficulties and slightly challenging conversations round about that, and we would suggest that should instead be referring to something more specific. For example, barriers along each of the side roads on the other side of Seven Sisters Road. Similarly, in relation to stewards, a minimum number in relation to those stewards. So we had a much better uplift in number of stewards this year, but there was variation in what we'd agreed beforehand. It went down below the agreed figure of 80, and also, to be fair, above. So we would suggest that there should be a condition which refers to a specific minimum number to take out some of the challenges that can come in the heat of discussions back and forth. And final point was just in relation to the conditions around about noise monitoring. My understanding is that the proposed revised condition refers to a single location. We would suggest that it should be locations, plural, to be agreed with both London Borough of Islington and London Borough of Hackney, to check that we've got enough monitoring commissions to cover the areas where we've had concerns raised with us by residents. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I want to move to summaries, really. Now, we are past 20 past 10. We should suggest a time limit on each of your summaries, obviously, to be the same. We have had it all out. I was going to say 10 minutes. Well then it will be 10 plus 1.
Well, maybe Mr. Street can go, we've raised everything else, but currently I've said pretty well.
Yeah. No, I mean, I take the point that a lot has been said, but if I give Mr. Sheen the benefit of a full summary, so I don't want it to go beyond 10 minutes, please. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Sir, you heard yesterday from residents, and I'm not going to try and summarise what they said to you. I wouldn't be able to do justice to what they said and to how they said it. You will note that the number of people who came here were not, as Mr. Colvin suggested, very few. They were many, and they came from all walks of life, and essentially what my client asked you to do is to listen to them. I'd like to make 3 observations about what they said. Firstly, it was consistent. Everybody was saying the same thing. Everyone was complaining about the same problems. Secondly, it was fair. They didn't complain about everything. They didn't complain about the vast majority of the festivals that take place. They said there were particular problems, and they picked those out and they pointed them to you. Thirdly, sir, I say it was credible. They weren't people who had any reason to have malice against the festival. They were simply people who came to explain to you the problems that happen in their day-to-day life. So as a result of that, I say that when you look at those representations, when you remember what it is people said to you, you must find that the licensing objectives of preventing public nuisance and preventing crime and disorder and protecting children from harm are all engaged. And I say it's incredible to suggest that the level of disturbance those people suffer is not a public nuisance. It's just incredible that an expert would sit before you and say that. I say all of them are engaged, and the question for you is, what are you going to do about it? Mr. Colvin referred you to the benefits of the festival, and he couldn't resist at one point mentioning the revenue that it results in. All I say about that is that if you take into account the benefits of this festival, take into account the disbenefits as well, all of the problems with running, all of the harm to people using the park, weigh it on both sides. Don't just take the pros and not the cons. But ultimately, sir, you should look at this through the lens of the licensing objectives, and you should aim to prevent breaches of the licensing objectives. That's the way in which it's put. Prevent crime and disorder, prevent public nuisance. It's proactive, it's positive, it's forward-looking. We say, at the very least, that that requires more robust conditions on wireless's licence. And we'd ask you to look in particular at the noise condition. And I'm sorry that I went round in circles when I asked questions about it, but we feel very strongly about the use of that Hertz limit where it should be dBc, and we have good reason, we say, why it should be at 85, not 90. It's not a commercial reason, it's because that's the level at which people will be protected, and we give 2 examples of that. Firstly, is the page I referred you to, 763. Your own environmental health officer sees that level of around 80, 85 as a problem. We've set it at the upper, not the lower. We've said 85. The second is the graph that you'll find on page 182 in Mr. Vivian's evidence. And if you look at that graph, you'll see that there's essentially a bulky section at the beginning between the hour of 8 and 9. And Mr. Vivian has done the maths. That's the time when the biggest problem with the base was heard. And if you take it down to 85, you cut that little hump out. You don't cut anything else out, just that hump. So he's carefully thought about the level he sets it, and that's the reason why he set it there. But, sir, ultimately, our case is that this festival is too big, too loud, and too unruly to be held in Finsbury Park. You heard reference to Field Day and Brockwell Park. Well, Field Day is gone from Brockwell Park now. It's moved on because it couldn't be held there anymore. It wasn't appropriate by virtue of the residential area. It's the same, we say, here. Ultimately, sir, you have sat here and you have listened to a very great number of people, and you can leave aside largely what lawyers and experts say. You've heard from the Mayor of Hackney, who has suggested that you should revoke this, and most importantly, you have heard from your electorate, from people who chose you, they elected you, you are their democratic representatives, and in 2003, Parliament made a decision and it moved licensing out of the magistrates' court and gave power back to democratically elected representatives. That's the reason it goes to a committee and not to a judge. And we say that's important. It's something that happens so that you, as the people's representative, make the decision and not a judge, and it's a democratic process. Mr. Colvin said that engagement produces results. Well, we are here, we are engaging with you, and we ask that you hear our voice loud and clear as it is. When you retire into that room, I would ask you just to keep one thing in mind, that everybody who has elected you in this room has said one thing. They have said the same thing. Their message has been consistent. And in reaching your decision, all we ask is that you give effect to the voice which you have heard.
Thank you. Right to Mr. Colvin.
Obviously, the way the Licensing Act is structured is that the licensing authority takes its advice from responsible authorities. In this case, you've had really powerful testimony from your own professional officers as to whether this festival is harming the licensing objectives. They are the people best placed to tell you about balance. Their work, both written and oral, is supported by the audit work carried out by Reading Borough Council and also the environmental health practitioners who my client employed to tell it whether it was creating more problems than it ought to, and is also supported by our independent work, in particular carried out by Mr. Griffiths. All the cross-examination of Mr. Griffiths proved is that Mr. Griffiths is the leading expert in this field. That's what you would get from the questions which just happened. It is fair to point out that Mr. Vivian's report actually referred to the necessity to re-evaluate the background levels. That was the recommendation in the report. And that continued until last night, when it was suggested that a level of 85 should be taken for background levels. And tonight that disappeared in the cross-examination of Mr. Griffiths, and he just picked an argument about Hertz's and DBCs and so forth. All three were as bad as each other. Mr. Griffiths and Mr. Charles have agreed what the level should be, and that level is commended to you. Just lastly, Councillor Selman, sorry, I didn't mean to disrespect Councillor Selman at all, but I just read the functions and responsibilities regulations about who gets to make representations on behalf of councils. If I've misunderstood how Hackney believe it works, I apologise. But so far as what she said substantively, she wanted a minimum number of supervisors to be set out in the licence. It's just never going to work because it has to be agreed year on year. But it does have to be agreed. And if the expert officers who attend the SAG are not in agreement with my client, then there won't be a signed-off event management plan and the event will not proceed. That is the control. You really ought not to micromanage in a live dynamic event the number of security officers placed here and here and here. That's what the licensing framework achieves for you. And secondly, she wanted more than one noise monitoring location. There's 6, which is more than other London parks, and next year there will be 7. But really, probably what I would say to Councillor Selman is that had there been the same engagement with wireless as there had been from the other authorities on this topic, then I'm sure that the Hackney officers would have agreed that the conditions which have eventuated were satisfactory for all 3 boroughs. But the other comfort she can take from this is that even outside the aegis of the licence, when there was engagement between Hackney and wireless, without a licence condition, without a review, without anything like that, my client increased the number of officers policing her streets from 14 to 87. That's the sort of goodwill which keeps licences going. So I hope that we've all learned something from today. I hope you agree with the conditions which are imposed, and I hope that we can all have a little bit of a rest from contention and get into a nice new era of goodwill and cooperation. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much. Right then, I'm about to close the meeting, but I would say just a quick thank you to everyone for turning up, taking part with the rest of it. That's professionals, residents, everyone. I think in general, it's been conducted with respect and in a very sensible manner, so I thank you everyone for that, and especially thank the officers who, as well as the professional preparation, it's obviously quite a lot of hard work, something like this, but also the organisation of the meetings and the papers for us. So thank you for all of that, and that is the end of the meeting. We will be giving the decision, obviously not tonight, within the 5 days as we are allowed, but you'll get that in good time. Anything else? No? Okay then. Thank you. Good night.